We are now recording. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Sullivan. I'm the chair of the Oregon Board of Accountancy. I'm calling this public meeting of the State of Oregon Board of Accountancy to order. Today is Thursday, June 6, 2024, and it is 8:34 a.m. This meeting is being held in person at board offices on 200 Hawthorne Avenue Southeast, Suite D450, Salem, Oregon 97301. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom participation is also enabled. If you are participating in this meeting by Zoom, please be sure to mute your microphone and unmute only when you are called upon to speak. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, the meeting will be paused until they are resolved. Before I move on to roll call, allow me to recognize our new board member, Megan Hartley from Deloitte. Welcome, Megan. It's a pleasure to meet you and appreciate you joining us.
Thanks. Yeah, happy to be here.
And so you're just confirmed by the Senate on May 31st. So that was vacated, that taking the board seat vacated by Nancy. So it's really nice to be back at full strength again. Okay, we'll now take a roll call for of members and guests. So we'll just move around the room first. Again, Joe Sullivan, board chair.
I'm Joanna Tucker Davis. I work for the Oregon Department of Justice.
Reba Dunnington, Human Resources for DAS CHRO.
Jeremiah Lippert, board staff.
Megan Hartley, board member.
Logan Steele, board member.
Haley Lyons, board member.
Ron Valdivia, vice chair.
Martin Petione, executive director.
Andrew Carlo, board staff.
Mary Lynn Berner, board staff. Sherry McPherson, OSCPA staff.
Jason Orm, Chair, Laws and Rules Committee.
Okay, perfect. That's everybody in the room. So now I'll just go through Zoom as I see them on my screen. So Stu, we'll start with you.
Stuart Morris, board member.
Okay, perfect. Adam?
Hi, Adam Applenelp, vice chair of the OSCPA.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Adam. And Jason?
Jason Robinson, board treasurer by Zoom.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Jason. Hope you're feeling okay. Is there anyone else that I'm not seeing?
That is everyone on Zoom.
Okay, perfect. And just before we move on, Megan, would you mind just kind of giving a quick background just for everyone to get to know you real quick?
Sure, yes. So I am an audit partner with Deloitte, have been with the firm for almost 19 years. I'm also the office audit leader in the Portland practice. There are about 100 practitioners on the audit side in our practice. My focus really over my career has been financial services, but it's Portland, so you got to sort of be a jack of all trades to some extent. So right now I sign a couple of public banks and also do some private companies here in the area.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. It's nice to actually have some additional assurance expertise on board as well. So I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, just for the public record and for clarification for anyone in the room who's not aware, we did not lose our counsel, Angie Hunt. She's simply unavailable to us until July 1. So Joanna very kindly agreed to step in Angie's absence. So just don't want there to be confusion. New counsel, we don't. We just have backup counsel. And we're super grateful to have Joanna here.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. And you might have to jump in and tell me I'm going rogue at certain times during the meeting, but so appreciate it. Angie never hesitates to.
And there's a reason why that spot is up here, because she knows that there is
it's in kicking distance.
There's signals above the table, signals below the table.
And kicking distance is probably a good thing. So, all right, well, let's move on to item number 2, which is the agenda review and approval. I think everyone's had a chance to review the agenda. I think, Martin, maybe you have a couple items that you'd like to add.
Yeah. So, folks, I got an email this morning from NASPA around the development that will be posted to the AICPA website later this afternoon around pass rates related to the new exam. So I'd like to cover that briefly and add that on as an item under new business. And then the other piece, I got confirmation from NASPA just this morning that our former LRC chair, Ray Johnson, is eligible for, I had to work through some criteria issues, but he's actually eligible for us to potentially consider nominating him for a NASBA award. There was an issue of how long he had to have been off the NASBA board in order to be eligible. So I now know that he is. So I'd like to bring that up as a brief discussion item under new business as well. So there's 2 items that I would respectfully ask to be added to the agenda. Because
Okay,
that
so we-
nomination deadline is June 30th.
So we could add items D and E to new
Yeah.
business.
Yes.
1 to discuss CPA exam pass rates, and then 2 nominating Ray for an award.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So if that, unless there's any other changes with those 2 additions, could I get a nomination to approve the agenda with those additions?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, perfect. I have a nomination and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes. And then I think we clarified, just for me and Martin, Megan's done everything she can vote this meeting, right? That's
Yes.
correct. So just wanted to make sure that I've read that correctly. So it's.
Yes, we're good there. And while on organizational pieces, I just got a Teams reminder because I'm one of the folks that has managed to not yet put in a lunch order, and we're about an hour and 15 minutes away.
Uh-oh.
We're not eating lunch.
Is there anyone here who has not yet had a chance to put in a lunch order? Because we can take care of that still over the next hour and 15 minutes. Okay, so it looks like I'm the only bad guy here. So, okay, I will take care of it.
Yeah. We can pause and.
No, no.
I
can do this.
When I do that, I'll share that I have ordered the exact same lunch from Little Lois for 10+ years.
The same thing?
It's the Thai wrap. Yes, with the trees and seeds salad. And for over 10 years straight. And I can't not do it. Can't change, so.
So,
you know, roll with this.
okay.
Be happy to share if anyone.
Did you say you were an accountant?
Most of the time, people can't tell, but that's one.
That's a tell.
That's a tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, we'll move on to item 3, review of the public board summaries. So this is the meeting summary of February 15th. So this was sent out with the original board materials. We did have another meeting on April 18th. That'll be a supplement at the July 17th meeting. So any comments on that? I don't think we needed motions there, do we?
We do not need any motions, but Megan, for your benefit, for various historical reasons, this board, and I'm now understanding, if I remember conversation with you, Joanna, we're no longer the only ones. We don't do formal minutes anymore. We basically use the recordings of the meetings as the formal minutes and post them. There is now a new law. I think it's Senate Bill 11, if I remember the number correctly. That also now requires us when Zoom meetings are, when meetings have a Zoom option, that we have to post the full recording of the meeting to our website. That basically has now this dual purpose of Senate Bill 11 compliance, as well as essentially functioning as the record of the meeting. We do still do, just because it's kind of a helpful tool for both us, kind of we don't call them minutes, but a super high level summary of what happened at the board meeting. So it's kind of a somewhat Solomonic solution that has a bit of a deep history around us at some point getting in trouble over minutes, and we just didn't want to have to deal with that anymore.
I just like to think of it as a way that my bad jokes can live on forever.
Nice.
Yeah, as recordings or video, so. All right, and then, yeah, there's probably, to Megan, for your benefit, as we move on to number 4, public comment, there's a script I read because there's a history here too. with public comment and people jumping in and saying things that are completely have nothing to do with the Board of Accounts business. So with that said, that's why the next thing I'll say is why I'm saying it. So we'll move on to item number 4, public comment. And I don't think so, just looking at the screen, but are there any members of the public who wish, or if there are any members of the public who wish to comment, please raise your hand in the room or use the Zoom raise hand feature. If I call on you for comment, you will be permitted to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes. Staff will unmute you so you can speak. As chair, I reserve the right to end your comment early and have staff mute you if your comment does not pertain to the authority given to this board by the legislature to regulate the CPA profession and public accountancy firms in the state. So do I have any public comment? Not seeing any, Andrew,
No.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 5, report of the OSCPA. Sherry, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. And I'd like to officially announce Vice Chair Adam Apfel, and the Vice Chair of the OSCPA Board is the liaison to the Board of Accountancy. They attend the meetings along with me. And Adam is in that role effective as of April 1st. So it's our new fiscal year. So thank you. And Adam is not able to join us in person today, but was looking forward to having been able to do so. And then coming up on other things, I would like to extend a thank you to Vice Chair Roll and also to Martin for working at the podium at the May 9th Circle of Excellence. It's a very enjoyable evening where we have new CPAs recognized. Thank you for doing so, as well as scholarship recipients, CPA candidates, member milestones, and other recipients. So thank you for doing that. And speaking of other things along that, I do appreciate, and I know the OSCPA board appreciates the Board of Accountancy inviting OSCPA and OAIA into the rulemaking process. So I just want to, be sure and place that out there publicly. Thank you very much for that. And it's given us a nice opportunity to be able to look at national things and to be able to see how they relate at home too. So much appreciation. CPE season is in full swing right now. So we have, Tana told me yesterday, we have 16,000 online courses. Now, I remember the days when we thought about how do we get anything online? It's like, boy, have things changed. But we have a number of live programs, hybrid programs, and then also the online. So there's plenty of opportunity from OSCPA perspective for our members to be able to find programming. So quality programming too. Looking at some other things, I do appreciate also the update. Martin brought it to my attention. A member had called me right after you sent me the email, the renewal information on the board's website. And that's very, very helpful. It gives everybody kind of a placeholder on where they are, and it's a reminder to get busy, and that those renewals are coming too. So thank you for that. I had a really nice feedback. The call that came into me was very positive about that. So thank you. So anyway, overall, that's the most high level things. And then of course, just all the work that we're doing, staying up on all these national changes and in conversations related to pipeline. So thank you. Adam, is there anything that you wanted to throw in there?
No, thanks, Sherry, but thanks everyone for having me. So I finally got my camera to work. So yeah, pleasure to be here and happy to be a resource to the board.
Thank you, Sherry. Adam, congratulations. We're looking forward to working with you. Any questions, comments from the rest of the board? Not seeing any. And then, item 6 is report of the OAIA, but I believe Amanda.
Yeah, Amanda has, unfortunately, it's just for the record, Amanda has a conflict today with another OAIA event where she needs to be presenting. So she's unfortunately not able to be here either in person or by Zoom. I don't know, Stu, if you want to say anything from the OAIA side. But I
I've
don't
been
believe. we
kind
have
of
a-
out of
yeah.
touch with my issues, so I'm not able to travel or do anything of that nature at this time. So I'm out of the loop.
Okay,
Okay, well, thank you, Stu. We will keep on moving then, so we'll go into item number 7, which is our rulemaking hearing. So we're 11 minutes ahead of schedule. I forgot to set a goal for us today, so we can do that maybe after this. But oh, we cannot start this early.
we
You're
cannot
already
start this early.
Okay.
Yes, because it was advertised for 9 a.m.
the
So
next
we're
thing.
gonna- we may need to do some other things, and I don't know, Joanna, I think I sent out an email yesterday kind of reminding folks that because of I'll just want to talk about the logistics here for a minute, right? Legally speaking, we are required to have essentially comment cut off at the same time, right? And what that means is that the oral comment deadline that's there for our rulemaking hearing and the comment deadline that's in writing have to be the same, right? So zoom out for a minute and let's talk about why we have rulemaking hearings at the board meeting, because as Joanna also pointed out to me it does present a little bit of extra logistics, because it means it forces me into a position of essentially giving the board live updates up until the last minute and checking emails, BOA info and one of my staff members emails, my own email, literally up until the last second to make sure that you have a complete written records. It makes it a little bit more bumpy, but why do we do that, right? The reason we do that is really kind of deeply rooted in history, because we didn't used to, quite frankly, do our rulemaking in the full sunshine, right? And so, quite frankly, having a rulemaking hearing where you're actually giving folks an opportunity, if they wish, to talk directly with the board and have the board actually present, rather than somebody like me who's basically an administrator and a bureaucrat, has real value in terms of us connecting with our base and being more accessible. So there's a little bit of a price that we pay for that accessibility, but making it a little bit more bumpy here. Second piece is, because we regulate the CPA community, I don't think I'm going to shock the board if I tell you that some CPAs really love doing last minute stuff. So I do have, in addition to the ones that came in up until 5 p.m., I have already at least 2 more waiting on email to send out to all of you. And I will have to double check that piece. So we will, after the rulemaking hearing, essentially fully update the written record so you can have a full record of essentially what has transpired. So that's essentially just my brief logistical overview that I think is legitimate for me to talk about before the start of the rulemaking hearing. So that's just the logistics piece. I don't know if there's anything else we can cover on the rulemaking side before we get into the hearing itself, because I think it's probably dicey if we start already diving into the written comments before they are finished, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's anything else you want to do.
Yeah, I want to keep moving just so we can get as much done as we can. So maybe we go to new business? Can we jump ahead to 9?
Sure.
It seems like those are pretty quick items. We've got 8 minutes. You can work on your lunch order too.
Oh, yes. Thanks. I don't think I'm gonna live that one down. Let's see here. Item 9, board appointments. Well, we already, I think, gave away the store with respect to Megan's arrival, so I think there's no more news there. So that's pretty awesome. But I also just want to put into the public record that we also had the Senate confirm Jason for a reappointment for what I think in Jason's case, this is your 3rd term. And we also had the Senate confirm at the same hearing as Megan was confirmed, Raul was confirmed for a 2nd term. So we have those pieces, I think, very well in place. And I think maybe, I don't know if you want to do that now or later on with the chair report. Basically what it means is we have quite a bit of work to do around board recruitment. board member
Yeah.
recruitment, because we have things we need to address, but that's probably a little bit closer to, that part's a little bit closer to your end of the equation than my own report.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could just cover it now. You know, and looking at part of what we always need to be doing as a board is like we're working on all these pipeline issues for the profession, but we also need to be thinking about it as a board all the time as well. So we're glad at, for now, we're at full strength, which is really nice. But in kind of looking ahead, and I hadn't really thought about it too much until recently, but my second term will be ending, let's see, March of 25. And so I think that's when I will roll off, probably not doing a third term. So I just want to announce that now. I think I've tried to think about it for a minute. I know between BOAC and the board, I've been doing this for a long, long time. I know Haley's overlap for most of that, so it's a long time. But so I think even though we've got a lot going on, and it's hard to step away in the middle of some of those things, I think that we've got great momentum, and I know that we'll be able to accomplish those under Martin's leadership. So I've got a lot of confidence that we'll do that for whatever's left after that. But want to put that out there now because we need to be thinking about, you know, who's going to come onto the board after that.
And just to be a little bit more specific, so this is about, you know, essentially Jason saying, okay, we're going to need to do, you know, be ready for a replacement for him in March of next year. And there's quite a bit of run-up process to that. We already know that Healy was very gracious to basically agree to stay on without a formal reappointment and continue serving for one more calendar year to help us through the transition and give us a little bit more strength on the attest side of the equation. So we know that there is something there. And then we also know that, you know, Stu is serving until replaced, and we don't know exactly what the governor's office intentions there are on timing, right? So that's also going to happen probably sometime in 25. I don't know when. And so we have at least, you know, we have at least 2, if not 3 positions we need to recruit for over the next 18 months. And the process is a pretty elongated process with the Senate confirmation. So that's essentially kind of the big picture. I have started initial outreach to OSCPA to do some tag teaming around finding candidates, but I also, obviously, that's a conversation I need to have with folks here around, you know, potential candidates who want to put in the hopper, because quite frankly, the governor's office, as they are getting more settled, I'm sure want to be in a position where they have more than one candidate to choose from, right? They like to be able to choose from a pool rather than here's the person we found. Because, I mean, if you put yourself in the position of the governor, that feels a little awkward if essentially you get a choice of one that comes, you know, as a candidate presented in the pool, right? So we have work to do around that piece.
Mm-hmm. So anyone, you know, if they doesn't have to be right now, but be thinking about, you know, good candidates to get in our own pipeline, because it takes time, and we need good people to continue the momentum we have. So, yeah, I don't need to be a hard cutoff, by the way, too. I just don't plan to be reappointed. So,
yeah, I had quite frankly wanted to have that conversation because March 15 is like right in the middle of the legislative session. And, you know, this could potentially become a really crucial legislative session for us. So keeping a little bit of stability until the end of the session would probably be enormously helpful for us.
Well, that's, and normally we have a February meeting, and then we, you know, don't talk a lot until June, or is it April, late April, or I know we had a very short meeting this past April, but anyway, I'll offer that up. But
Is there a required mix or preferred mix in terms of a test versus
There's nothing formally required, so it's interesting you bring it up because we're actually going to touch on that a little bit later on as part of the LRC report out, because there is already an effort underway blessed by the governor's office to simplify kind of the statutory language. But even now, where we have in our existing language, that's really more about, it's not really about a test versus tax, although there is a couple that's essentially tied to public accounting firm type background, right? But even there, it doesn't specify. So that's always been kind of more behind the scenes, working with the board and our stakeholder community in the governor's office, that we maintain a solid mix. And that's just as true on the board. So it's essentially a behind the scenes conversation saying, hey, we really need somebody on the tax side this time, or we really need somebody on the attest side this time, or this time we're so well balanced that it doesn't matter. And you can, other criteria can come, further into the background. But that's always more like behind the scenes kind of conversations, because we've essentially learned that being super specific about this slot is a test or this slot is tax actually really hamstrings. So it's kind of easier to have that unspecified, but essentially well managed behind the scenes. That's kind of the super high level answer. That's the same thing with a little bit, Jeremiah, on the BOAC, right? But we try to keep that on our complaints committee, where we try to keep that balance. It's not formally required in our committee documents, but it's just a natural thing we do.
What was that, Andrew?
Make a note that we are adding a guest.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
Did we want to, we just pause and make sure they introduce themselves for the record here?
Yep.
I don't see them on the screen, so I don't know.
Rachel Reardon.
Rachel, would you mind just announcing yourself on Zoom, please?
On my side, it shows that she's still trying to connect.
Okay, I can't see it, Jason, so it's, yeah. Andrew, could you just let me know, and then we could, if it looks like she's connected, we can just try to pause again.
And it is 9:01, we could start the rulemaking.
Okay, so I
which
think-
is the likely.
If she has an issue, I could introduce her.
Oh, do you know who it is?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Did we cover 9A completely? If we covered 9A, then that's an okay spot to go back, so we can enter our rulemaking hearing. Okay, was everyone good on that? And Megan, that's a good question, because it is important as we get into the cases, especially the more complex ones, that we have a well-balanced board in our actual areas of expertise. So it's really helpful because we can look at each other when it's, hey, this is where I specifically work and I know this spot. So, okay, we will go back to item number 7. And we will start the rulemaking hearing. So we'll move into the rulemaking hearing and call the Oregon Board of Accountancy's public rulemaking hearing on the board's currently proposed rules to order. It is June 6, 2024 at 9:02 a.m. This rulemaking hearing is soliciting oral comments on the proposed permanent rules for OAR Chapter 801, primarily to reduce barriers for applicants for licensure. Anyone called upon for comment will be permitted to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes, and staff will unmute as necessary so you can speak. As chair, I reserve the right to end your comment early and have staff mute you if your comment does not pertain to the topics of the proposed rules and authority given to this board by the legislature to regulate the CPA profession and public accountancy firms in this state. So is there anyone wishing to comment in the office? Sherry?
Sherry McPherson, OSCPA. I would just like to say that we're in favor of the elimination of the barriers as proposed in the proposed rulemaking.
All right, good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Any other comments in the room? Not seeing any. And then is there any comments on Zoom?
pause for a second and ask Rachel can we tell if Rachel has been able to connect?
That she's connecting audio.
Okay, and then Sherry, you know her, and then why she's connecting, was she?
Yes, so Rachel is joining, to be participating in the rulemaking. Rachel is with the the Accountants Coalition, so we call it TAC. They work with state CPA societies through CPA steering committees. And for example, that's through the Big Four. So Rachel is one of the team members. So she'll be joining today. And you've met some of the other colleagues before,
Okay,
Martin, so she's on that team.
it sounds like she has technical trouble.
It appears that
It looks like she's on.
she should be.
Oh, good.
Okay, perfect. Have you taken her off mute? Okay, yeah, hi, Rachel. Can you hear us okay?
Rachel, we can't hear you, so can you check if you're on mute?
She's at the microphone.
Joanna, do we have any options of trying to get her on a phone line? Is that,
Yeah,
is that,
or
is that permissible?
It'd be fine. If you could.
If you have a phone number
If you
for
have a
her,
direct line,
do you
maybe.
mind just literally putting your phone in the middle of the room and putting her on speaker if that works? Seriously, I mean, just to get around this issue and
Yeah, that way we can make sure everyone's heard and get through it.
Sorry, let me see if I have it.
We're not supposed to use
can
the
you put
chat.
my
Yeah.
phone number into the chat and see if she's willing to call my cell directly?
Seems like the easy thing.
Put my phone off of. Phone is now allowed, which I will regret in a moment.
Here we go. I'm calling.
Okay. I see there is a chat message in there. Is that from her?
That would be me to everyone.
Oh, no, it's you to everyone. Okay.
All right. We're doing good on time.
Oh, wait. This is when you were supposed to remind me to put in my lunch order.
I just did. Oh, sorry, sometimes I read this and you're like, what have you to do for? I just read that.
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah. That's- I had to go to a, So I didn't have much time. I was at a fifth grade talent show last night. There wasn't a lot of talent. But it was fun.
It's the time of year for all the things.
Yeah.
I also have a fifth grader.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sort of surprised our school doesn't do like a fifth grade graduation.
I think they do, I hear what they do is like a clap out or something.
Oh, okay.
They
Interesting.
clap them all out of the
Yeah.
primary school. Okay, perfect. So we've got,
We got 5 minutes for it.
It's not, we don't.
okay, thank you for trying to do everything we can to get her the opportunity, and we'll do 5 minutes. And if anyone needs to get an early coffee, water, restroom break, let's do it. We don't need to take a formal break, but
No, let's not do it.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
If
not
anyone
now.
needs to grab like a quick cup of coffee or something. No?
No, because if she comes in the next minute, we need to make
Oh.
sure we're here to listen.
Okay, yeah, I was just saying, possible, okay.
No, we
Never
can't.
mind.
We can't pause.
You will go thirsty.
Consider that your first kick.
I don't know, REARDON. I don't know if she has another.
Okay.
You put tie wrap.
You should have audio now. Is she
Should
unmute?
do you wanna see if she's
Is she
there?
unmute herself?
Yeah, we can't see her on ours unless they arrow over. But, yeah, Rachel, can you hear us by chance?
I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, perfect.
Great.
Sorry.
Yeah, Rachel, we're, you're in the rulemaking hearing here, so we've been kind of holding off, making sure you could get connected. We've got 4 more minutes, so we wanted to make sure you had a chance to make any comments.
Oh, no comments from my end. I was just calling to listen in. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for calling in. We appreciate you joining us, and so I think we're all done if there's no other comments.
So you should wait till 9:15 and then officially close it, because someone could come in the next 2
Okay,
minutes. And they have
so
to.
I am not concluding the rulemaking hearing for 3 more minutes.
Yes.
We will wait.
All right, I think that what I can legitimately do is scan for more written comments in the time and get the other written comments out to the board. So let me just do a little bit of scanning here and see if I got any more stuff other than the 2 that I got in overnight.
Yeah, I think I know this by now. We've done a fair amount of these hearings the past 2 years, but.
Let's go look over on the side.
Rachel expressed a sincere expression of thanks.
Okay, great, yeah.
Okay, drafts. All right, folks. You're copied here too. So I hit send on that as well. All right, folks, while we're waiting for the oral comment period to expire, I did just forward you 2 more written comments received since 5 p.m. yesterday that you all should get on your email in just a few seconds. Joanna, you're on that email as well, as are you, Andrew, and Jeremiah. Oh, Jason, I will add you in as well, so that you have the full Too many Jasons, sent it to the wrong Jason. All right.
So we got about one more minute, according to my clock. All right. So we can use that minute to look at the additional supplements that we were just provided. Okay, we're at 9:15 now, so go ahead and conclude our rulemaking hearing, and we will consider all oral comments and the written comments received when we get to agenda item 8A. So let's move on to item 8, our board work session. So starting with 8A, rulemaking, our final consideration. So item number 1, which would be the consideration of oral and written comment with respect to the exposed rules. I know Martin just forwarded the latest ones we had received, which was open up until our hearing 15 minutes ago. So Martin, do you want to make any comments with the records and supplements that we've received?
Yeah, I mean, I think that since you have the full comment record in front of you, it's a little bit less risky for me now, and I'm always going to look a little bit in Joanna's way so that I don't, do anything that would get us in trouble. But I do feel like we can, at a super high level, say overall, I think we're getting a lot of positive responses. I was trying to be very inclusive on responses, including the ones that didn't really seem to be on topic, but it seemed awkward to start being kind of the arbiter of what's on topic and what's not. So you have a fair amount of items that are actually comments that are actually more about what we're going to discuss later as part of our legislative proposal, and folks commenting on wanting changes in our licensure pathways, which is not part of our current rulemaking, right? So you have that element in there. You do have some voices that are, a little bit of a small minority, but a kind of a vocal minority that says, hey, we liked it when things were tougher in Oregon. And there were, I think, at least 2 voices, if I recall, in that rulemaking in there that essentially were very fine with us being a little bit more different and tougher than other jurisdictions. So I want to just, in fairness, say that while the vast majority is out there appreciating the work that we do, there is a bit of a smaller community out there that's that feels a little bit like something got lost in the process. And I think beyond that, we have a couple of detailed comments in there, and I am quite frankly on this one, and Joanne, I don't like putting you too much on the spot here, but we have in the supplemental comments that I sent out yesterday, the very first one is extremely long, very detailed. And it's kind of part of a conversation about what they think a rule means, or where something may or may not be correct, and kind of bundled in with a couple of scrivener's errors that essentially this person found that the scrivener's errors piece is essentially typos. But that's kind of, I think, the legal term for the typos that this particular individual found. My understanding is, and Joanna, please correct me if I'm wrong, that if the board were to approve and adopt, so if we're not talking about substantive amendments, but adopts a set of rules language, and we find essentially a grammatical, error of an apostrophe, or here's, the word a twice, that we don't have to deal with it at the board meeting, that part we can deal with outside the board meeting.
Well, you can, on the other hand, if you know they exist, you can also say, you can orally adopt them, correct them, board votes on them today.
Yeah.
I know we have a new board member here. So what happens with rules is there's a process in which rules go out for public comment, and this is all about transparency and making sure the board hears the public. When it comes down to voting on final rules, you can make changes to the rules that were within the scope of what the public knew you were gonna do. So like yes or no kind of things, but what you don't want to do without going back out for public comment is make changes that are so substantive that the public had no idea you were contemplating this, right? If you were thinking, like, if you get to the rules and you're like, oh, actually now listening to public comments, we want to do something really different, that then just needs to go back out for public comment and come back. So things like typos, Scrivener's errors, things that the public knew were within the realm of what you might consider today are fair game.
But beyond that, I think the most important thing is that we need to make sure that there is time for, especially board members, to give any feedback if they saw anything in the comments that gave them second thought around any particular section of our rulemaking or language issues.
Yeah. So Joanna, if I understood that right, and they might have some comments down there. If there's some typos, they can be fixed. So that as a board, we don't have to sit here with, 10 people in the room, try to agree upon the typo and fix it and come up with a precise motion to fix that. That'll be fixed.
You can give direction to fix typos.
Okay.
Make sure
Okay,
there's,
perfect.
we wanna make sure
I'd
the
rather
really
not
typos,
spend our
right?
time
Yeah.
talking about grammatical errors and grateful that they're found and they're corrected, but I don't really want to spend our time discussing those.
And just to be really clear, if the board goes down that road to simply give staff the direction to fix typos, there's always an accountability loop. What that means is that process-wise, I will send out any corrections to council and to the chair to make absolutely sure that, everybody is on the same page, that these are just typo corrections, as opposed to going over the line that would get us into trouble.
Okay. Is everyone okay with that part of it? Sorry.
Yes, I'm wondering if you can drop the written comments in the box folder. It's not making it through my email system. Unless maybe now it's,
You can come look
Oh, I
at
got
one of
Logan's.
my many monitors if you'd like.
never mind. I got it from Logan.
Oh, all right.
I don't know why yours
Thank
didn't let come. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just my thoughts, what people are looking at that is, I was happy to see, because normally you see, a vocal minority that, in this case, you actually saw a lot of confirmation of support, that people took the time to say, hey, we appreciate what you're doing. So that was nice to see. Martin mentioned kind of that, a vocal minority, maybe saying, no, we like the extra value Oregon has. Maybe we were tougher to get a license. And I just think, I don't mind saying out loud, that's exactly what we're not trying to do. Just to put that on record, Oregon is no lesser and no more value a place to get licensed than any other state. And that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish. A CPA is a CPA. So just for anyone wondering that, I think we're all on the same page there, but addressing that comment, and frankly, I've never actually heard that before. Yeah, Oregon's a more valid, a more esteemed place to be licensed. I've never heard that in my career. So.
On the positive side of the equation, one of the things that I would add is, it's just my personal impression, is that it's rare in a rulemaking to get as many comments as we did that are not really at the policy level or general feedback, but very personal comments of, this is changing my trajectory. This is helping me either already or will be helping me once adopted, right? And that's probably, for me, over the last year, one of the most rewarding things for me, as much as I'm a policy wonk, have been those moments when you're able to help physical candidates or folks that are, already licensees and say, this is something I can help with now because of something we put in place where I would not have been able to help in the past. And there's a fair amount that you have there in that written record of folks that are saying, wow, this is going to absolutely change my options, my ability to come back into the profession or my ability to enter the profession. And that, I think, quite frankly, that credit goes to all of you. That's pretty amazing. I mean, I'm the lucky one who gets to deal with those cases live every day, but take a moment, you come here basically roughly once a quarter and some calls in between. This is really great feedback for all of you. That doesn't happen very often in agency rulemaking, that you get those kinds of comments.
Well, I enjoyed seeing those comments too, and I also appreciate seeing the comments and just about the responsiveness of the board staff too. And then, I mean, so much so there's even an endorsement for governor if you go down the rabbit hole. So if anyone saw that, so I had to mention that. Sorry, Mark.
I like to put in all caps.
The one about I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
But I care enough to tell you.
Yes, there are several of the, I don't know why you're asking my opinion, but here, I'll give it to you.
Right.
One of those, by the way, I was touched by, because I don't know, those of you who have been around for a long time, you have recognized the name, but one of the ones that was in that category is like, why are you still talking with me? It's actually a former PwC managing partner, Larry Brown, who was one of my former bosses.
I see.
But long retired, no longer licensed, gave up his license, and so, yeah, I have to reach out to him and connect, because he was surprised to see my name. And surprised to be contacted. And just to be really clear, the reason why we did something different this time, I should have put that on the record. We did something different this time. So normally when we do rulemaking and that impacts licensees, we just blast it out to all licensees, which by the way is not required, but we do it, right? This time around, we went and we've also previously, because we've done so much rulemaking that impacts candidates, we've made absolutely sure that we blasted out to literally every candidate that we know of in our pipeline so that they know what we're doing and what we're trying to change, right? This time around, we went one step further. It was pretty radical, but I thought it was necessary because the rulemaking this time was about bringing people back into the profession that literally no longer had a license. And there was no good way to do this. So we literally simply authorized this to literally be sent out to anybody who had formerly had a record in our database, even if no longer licensed, right? People that had literally termed out of the system, were currently lapsed, were fully gone. So literally there were 18,000 emails that left this building, right? And so because the goal was to reach folks to let them know, hey, if this was an unintentional exit, you now have options to come back, right? And so that's also one of the reasons why you have some of that feedback. The price you pay is like, why are you still talking with me? I no longer care, right? But that wasn't really the point, to elicit those responses. The point was to reach the population that needs awareness, that's hardest to reach for us, which are those that have basically dropped out.
And on Larry, I think I ended up in BOAC because of Larry. So I saw that a long time ago. Any comments, questions regarding oral or written comments that we've all received? Not seeing any online. Jason, Stu, anything on your end? Just want to make sure you have a chance to speak as well.
Nothing on my end.
Okay. Perfect. And then Joanna, here's where I might get my second kick of the day, so just keep me on track here. But if we're gonna see a motion, can we do the maybe grammatical stuff as just direction after a motion?
That's fine.
Okay, perfect. So I'm not hearing in discussions any potential amendments. Not surprising. So at this point, what I would need would be a motion to approve and adopt the proposed rules amending Chapter 801 as exposed with an effective date of July 1st, 2024. set that one up so they could say maybe so moved. if
Oh, that's great.
wants to.
So moved.
Perfect. Do I have a second?
It's actually.
Second.
Perfect. I hear a second. All right.
There you go.
Thank you. All right, we have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes.
Is Stu still with us?
Yes, I
It's-
asked him to unmute.
All right.
I know, I saw
Got it.
Jason was actively there on the screen and sometimes I can't see everybody.
Okay.
Do we want to know?
Nope.
We keep moving here. I think so. The motion passes and then we just want to make sure to direct staff that, with the rulemaking to correct any grammatical errors or typos as necessary.
Okay, and I will do the feedback loop with council and you just to make sure that
Okay.
things are completely on the up and up. And we
Perfect.
do have a very detailed feedback from a very kind individual who commented yesterday. It's basically giving us a roadmap to where the typos are.
Yeah, saw that.
Love this profession.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, there was nothing from Scott Haley. So what, is he on vacation or something?
Question. Maybe you listen to the recording back where you told him to find a hobby.
Okay, in Scott's defense, in
Yeah.
Scott's
If you
defense,
listen to the recording, then it's really true.
in Scott's defense, he's been super active in pipeline subcommittee. So yes, he has been around and helping a lot.
Oh, I know.
All in check.
I appreciate Scott's expertise and wisdom more than anybody, but it's fun to
Got him.
fun to joke about. All right. Well, that takes care of our board work session. We can move, oh, never mind, 8A, sorry. We'll go to 8B. Thought I was way ahead. We'll go to 8B, the Public Accountancy Act legislative concepts, so continued development. So kind of the goal of the work session is informational, we'll just try to ground and all the relevant developments since the last board meeting. So ultimate objective here would just be to discuss and fine tune our approach to the language in our concept, specifically focusing on the issue of balancing specificity versus authority and rulemaking, and what would serve the board and profession in the best way possible here. So let's go to item 1, kind of level set of the work accomplished and approved by the governor office to date. Mark, want to take us through that?
Yeah, so this is probably by far the simplest piece, and this is really just a reminder to the board because there's really no news here. This is just to kind of level set us and and quite frankly, also for Megan, it's not news because Megan is a, how should we say this, survivor of the Laws and Rules Committee process. And so what I simply want to remind folks of is that we have a set of language changes that we've worked on for a while that have been both through the LRC and the board and are already approved by the governor's office that are essentially, I hate to say a done deal because nothing's ever a done deal until things emerge out of the legislative process, but where we have a solid foundation. So I'm going to just touch on those just as a reminder very briefly, right? One is we have amendments to the inactive status stuff that we've discussed here. I don't want to say ad nauseum, but that have been through the board and the governor's office and the LRC. So I don't intend to go back over those again. And we have the other language that's in our organizing statutes in 410, which is the language that has been through this board, through the LRC and the governor's office around simplifying board member appointments, right? So those are the two pieces where we are, if you will, as prepared as we can to say we can turn stuff over to legislative council for drafting, right? Then the next piece, which is a little bit in between and overlaps, I'm only going to touch on it briefly because it really needs to become part of the report that Jason will give us from the LRC side, is we do have language that was drafted by board council and discussed at the LRC around the private equity piece, but that's something we're going to cover at the LRC. So that you haven't yet seen, that hasn't yet been through the governor's office, and there's a couple of other things that haven't been through the governor's office yet that we'll cover in the LRC report. So for now, I simply want to focus on, here's the foundation. Later on, we'll get to the LRC report, but there's basically a ton that has happened that is now building on top of this. And that's really what the subsequent agenda items are about. And Joe, if you don't mind, if I can just use it as a transition, but just keep going.
Keep going.
As quickly as possible here. So there's a lot that's happened since the last board meeting. One is, you saw in your packets, probably one of the easiest things to transition on is that we had a very substantive discussion at the last board meeting around the NASBA, the current state, the then current state of the NASBA professional licensure task force proposal for an additional licensure pathway option that they call the SPP, the Structured Professional Program, right? At the time, and you have that in your records, the board was really clear saying the way the question was asked at the time was, are you in favor of the task force continue discussing something? And of course, we said yes to that, but we also heavily qualified it because we weren't really super enthused about the specific content of the SPP, which at that time of that board meeting was still very, very, very heavy on bureaucracy. It would have required firms to register with NASBA, supervisors to register with NASBA, applicants to register with NASBA, and essentially have everything funneled through NASBA in order to essentially create a structured learning pathway under that licensure path. It would not have at that time provided an opportunity, quite frankly, for anything to occur outside public accounting firms, including in the private sector, right? So we put all that in our comment. You have that comment back in, and we were not the only ones, quite frankly, that commented that way. So I'll kind of fast forward a little bit to the executive directors conference that occurred and legal counsel conference that occurred in April. And quite frankly, I don't feel like I have much of a choice to at least mention that publicly. But what happened at that conference was some pretty public frustration, and there's some tension, in the room around. So this kind of bad news first, that there was really kind of a disconnect between the feedback from the jurisdictions and the way that feedback was presented, because at the conference, we had presentations from NASBA that basically said jurisdictions are overwhelmingly in favor of what's happening at the PLTF, right? And we said, hey, wait a minute. We just said that we're in favor of you continuing the conversation, and that was a different message than a specific endorsement of that specific version, right? So that's the bad news first. The good news is that right now, there are positive developments on the task force with respect to hearing some of the substance of that feedback. So the SPP is continuing to morph. They're continuing to work it. It now no longer, in the latest iteration that we heard, no longer requires firms to register with NASBA. That element is gone. It is now a structure where basically the supervising, the supervisor supervising the candidate, and the candidate would have to register with NASBA. That's significant in two ways. One is it makes it more scalable, because essentially firms don't have to prove that they're qualified and need to register and go through a whole process with NASBA, right? Number two, it now opens it up as something that can work outside public accounting firms, including for, let's say the Nikes of the world, and the folks that have, multiple CPAs in the private industry. So there are some good developments with respect to being somewhat responsive to this. That said, and you probably, for those of you that read deeply into the California materials that are further in, and we're not the only ones that still have reservations about, is this really a super feasible pathway? The other piece that's changed in all of this, which is also different from what you heard at the February board meeting, is that NASBA has now begun in its tonnage to much more explicitly call the SPP a 120 semester plus 2-year proposal. So you may recall that in the early stages, you couldn't really tell where this, in the very early phases of the SPP development, you couldn't really tell where this was going, right? And there were actually elements of this that looked like could become more like a 3-year program initially based on the 120. So that's changed as well. So they've kind of honed in on this is a 120 plus 2 proposal, but they are very much describing it, and in that sense, very accurately, as one that really requires some structure around what needs to occur inside those 2 years. Now, I want to be also very transparent about, I had a conversation that gave me a lot of things to think about with the outgoing CEO of NASBA at that conference, because I couldn't understand, right? Because there was just nothing in the commentary, nothing in the materials that allowed me to understand the most fundamental question that so many of us not just in this jurisdiction, other jurisdictions have had of what is the problem? What is the holdback about considering essentially a supervised, a 2-year supervision piece, right? The way we used to have it with 120 semester hours plus 2 years of supervised experience. And I learned a lot from that conversation, right? One is, there's 2 data points that are really, really important for the board to be aware of. One is one that I think we actually did briefly touch on either at the December or the February board meeting, which is you cannot make an assumption that the really heavy structure that we developed in Oregon around all the competency requirements that we have, the 7 specific competencies for licensure, right? The fact that we are having the applicants, the candidate, attest that they met those competencies. The fact that we have the supervising CPA attest to those competencies. That's the norm, because it's not. We are essentially a bit on the much more, if you will, hardcore requirement of saying, we want to make sure that yes, it's supervised experience between the supervising CPA and the candidate, but we really very specifically spell out what our expectations are around the competencies. And so one piece, the first data point that's really important here is that the board needs to know that we are far stricter than number one, the UAA, because none of those pieces are required at that level in the UAA. We are going beyond the Uniform Accountancy Act. And because of that, we're also ahead of many other jurisdictions in terms of the strictness in which we operate our supervised experience piece, right? And so there's the first element that I learned from that conversation is that because the UAA sets such a low floor that basically says anybody can sign off on the experience is not really super defined, that there's a lot of jurisdictions that are operating at that relatively, if you will, far less regulated level. And because of that, there is a hesitancy, right? There's a bit of a regret around this, and there is a hesitancy to embrace the continuation of that lower floor. And in fact, Dan Dustin, when he called me, I forget exactly what the timing was, I think it was still before the February board meeting, he basically admitted to me that he actually brought up our framework at the PLTF for that exact reason, right? To see if that would be one way that the task force would embrace like a supervised concept, and it didn't fly, right? The second piece, which really, really surprised me for a number of reasons that I learned in that conversation with Ken Bishop, is that even though NASBA hasn't publicly said this, and I don't know why, right? If you set this in the broader context of this being a international license that is internationally tested for, internationally sought after, right? What Ken basically admitted to me is that NASBA feels that they're running kind of aground in terms of efforts to further expand the the memorandums of the mutual recognition agreements is the formal name, right? That NASBA has done a fantastic job of trying to figure out ways to essentially have both CPAs that are US licensed have an easier pathway to practice in countries outside the US, and similarly to have essentially defined pathways, streamlined pathways for CPAs that fall under one of the, I think there's about 7 countries where there are MRAs in place right now, to essentially have a much easier pathway to get licensed in the USA because of these MRAs, right? We work with that structure. It's a phenomenal piece of work. He basically admitted to me is that that work has run aground in part because the countries they're mutually trying to sign agreements with actually understand that in many US jurisdictions, the supervised experience piece is kind of pretty minimalist. So not Oregon, but pretty minimalist, right? So there's one of the drivers that they haven't really publicly acknowledged, but I don't know why we shouldn't just bring it up in a public meeting, is that they feel like, hey, we will have an easier time continuing on the acceptance of the CPA credential on an international level if we have a more structured program around, the experience requirement. But that's one of the reasons why they're pushing that. And that actually made sense to me. So it kind of flabbergasted me why that's not simply said out loud. I don't think that's super controversial, but that was just kind of an interesting kind of policy level learning moment for me that I took out of the April conference. So that's kind of another piece that essentially I'm skipped here into 2B because it was just easier to connect the dots from the board meeting into all the NASBA stuff. That said, I haven't heard much about the SPP in the last couple of months, and I don't know exactly why. I suspect it must be just, quite frankly, the time of the year, and they've just been through a CEO election process where I think most of you have picked up on the fact that Dan Dustin is now essentially going to be replacing Ken Bishop. I think it's at the end of July, if I remember correctly. So I think they're somewhat preoccupied right now around this stuff, about this internal stuff. But I don't know, so we haven't gotten any updates recently, right? So that's the NASBA side. In addition to all of this comes another head turner. That's the stuff that you have under 2A in your materials, right? That unfortunately happened just a few weeks after our February board meeting, which means we haven't really had a chance to discuss it, which is Washington passed House Bill 1920. Now, you have the text of the bill in your materials, right? What I really just want to emphasize is, I've had the privilege of working up in Washington State civil service for 5 years. And because of that, also had contact with their legislature. I'm somewhat familiar with their legislature, even though I'm much more of an expert on the Oregon one. The fact that you had a complete rewrite of the Public Accountancy Act in the state of Washington go through the legislature without a single no vote at any stage in the process, no amendments at any stage in the process. In Washington, unlike Oregon, has floor amendments, so there's far more ability to amend legislation than in a more closed process that the Oregon legislature uses, right? This bill literally zipped through the process with zero opposition, zero amendments, and landed on the governor's desk. And it's now law, right? It's like, that is not normal. That's a quite stunning achievement, right? And what it does for us at the policy level, it basically meant that, you know, I let Joe know and say, this is a really different approach, because unlike all the other proposals, whether they were, you know, coming primarily from societies in those states that have moved legislation before, or, you know, our own previous discussions, Washington didn't actually propose anything specific around an additional licensure pathway or an additional, here is what the alternative to 150+1 should be. In essence, they kind of went halfway, right? And basically said to the legislature, their argument was, hey, there is so much changing in this national picture. We don't know yet where it's going to land. We want to be able to respond to it as a board of accountancy, right? Legislature, please let the profession work this out internally and give the board the authority to do this by rule. And they took a whole bunch of specificity out, right? So this ties back into Joe's introductory comments earlier, because that's really one of the most fundamental things we need to discuss about how far we want to go down that road, right? Because basically, they gave the board a blank canvas and said, you paint it by rule. That's basically what 1920 does. So it didn't pin the Washington board down. Now, I can publicly say, because that happened at a public meeting of the Washington board, so I'm not violating any confidences, I can say that it is not a secret that there is a lot of interest at the Washington board level in a 120 semester hour pathway. So it's not that they don't want to do it, they just chose a different approach in terms of giving them flexibility to kind of what the future will bring, right? And this got even more interesting. So this happened in late February, right? And became law sometime in March, right? Talked with Joe about this and essentially also started some conversations with Sherry, who, you know, quite frankly, you know, I just had to ask the question of, is, you know, where are our stakeholders at with respect to that balance between specificity and authority for the board to do rulemaking? Because that's a really significant policy question, and one where we know, at least from the past, that there is some nervousness, right, by our stakeholders around doing too much by rulemaking at the board level, right? I mean, it's just important to call that out, because there is nervousness there. And I now know also from a conversation that I had with Amanda on the OEIA side, that nervousness is not limited to the OSCPA side, right? So no one wants to be super specific about where exactly the solution is, right? Where exactly the line falls, but I think it's important to acknowledge that, you know, everybody kind of struggles with what exactly is the right answer to that question. And we're going to need to probably get really specific with language to really have that conversation successful, right? And to make this all even more interesting, and I promise I couldn't have set this up better, but I did nothing here, right? The California board started on the opposite side of the equation, right? So the California board essentially in just a few weeks ago in May, essentially did a special meeting around licensure options, right? And they approached it exactly from the other end of the equation, right? So instead of working on language, what they did is, how should we paint this canvas? So Washington did the blank canvas thing. California, with their resources, what's really interesting in what you have in your materials under the California side is that they basically said, let's start with the policy discussion of what we think makes sense as an evergreen model for licensure, kind of recognizing that it's really hard for a profession that's tied in to mobility and substantial equivalency, and where we're really trying to not fall off the wagon with respect to cross-border practice, right? What makes sense? And they essentially had a very different conversation. And their conversation was around, how can we create a model that's flexible enough to accommodate a variety of options for candidates for licensure, and then figure out the language piece later, right? So they did exactly the opposite of what Washington, and I don't mean that critically, right? Every approach has its merits. I'm just saying it's really interesting for us at this board meeting that you're looking at in terms of well-meaning folks trying to figure out the right way to do things, taking very different approaches to how do we solve this conundrum, right? I will say publicly that in part, what you also see is a bit of a reflection of the vacuum of, at the national level, right? You have more initiative at the local level now, whether it's 1920 in Washington, whether it's individual jurisdictions pushing legislation, whether it's the California board starting those discussions, right? It's probably a reflection in part of that there really isn't a national consensus yet that has really settled out between AICPA and NASBA and the task force. And I don't know, I kind of want to stop there. And I don't know if Sherry and Jason, do you want to jump in for a minute and give us a little bit of a feedback for the public part of the discussion of what happened at AICPA in the last, what was it, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago, we were in Orlando for AICPA Council. And they have their own Californian materials I was reading, had their own kind of outreach and where we think this ought to be. And AICPA put together the National Pipeline Advisory Group that started last July, their work with surveys. And they gave a presentation of what those surveys said and where they are and what their recommended approach is. And it was very interesting to listen to. They said different people, we all came in very strongly with our opinions about 120 or 150 or whatever. And they said we put everything on the table and here's what shook out. With regard to the licensure piece, the concern nationally that I think we're hearing at the AICPA is that they want to preserve mobility and reciprocity, and totally understand that because we're unique as a profession. We have that. And so what NPAG, National Pipeline Advisory Group, suggested is something that would maintain reciprocity mobility right now, but then maybe move away, give us time to work through some things. What they suggested is basically to get to the 150, we maintain 150. To get to the 150, we have universities grant college credit for students working in the profession, but it's on transcript credit, which means the students are writing checks for tuition to receive that credit, and basically that credit is coming as to get to the 150. Now, I'm not going to speak. So when I speak now, I'm not speaking as a member of the AICP, or I'm not speaking as a member of AICPA Council. I am not speaking as past chair of the Oregon Society of CPAs. I'm talking as Jason Moore, practitioner. Okay. So I get what they're trying to do. And what they're trying to do, in my personal opinion, is this situation is stunningly fluid, amazingly fluid. We saw a difference in 6 months from what we heard in Pasadena, California, in the fall council meeting. They're trying to walk a line as we work through this. So that's why the first proposal is, okay, we're gonna have this on transcript learning that's occurring as basically work study. So I could hire somebody with the laws we have now, I could hire somebody into my firm, 120 hours. They could begin studying for and sit for the exam. They connect with a university. They get additional credits. Get to the 150, part of those credits would come from being in my firm, and then now they're able to be licensed. That's option A that OSC, that NPAG has. Option B takes it one step further into the realm of, now we're gonna break stuff. And that is, okay, we're gonna give them credit for that time working for Jason. But it's gonna be out transcript, which now causes issues with the 150 issue. And they know that. And they know that's gonna cause this breakage. The last proposal to me is pretty interesting. And it certainly causes breakage. And this is not near that they're talking about, it's more down the road. And that is, I have a woman in my office who's worked for us for 16 years. Great lady. She has 150 hours, but they're not an accountant. She has, I'm gonna get the degrees reversed probably, but just bear with me for a minute. Her undergrad is, I think, in math, and her master's degree is in chemistry. Great lady. She's done tax work for 19 years. Could she be licensed under our existing structures? No. But NPAG wants to look at someone like that to say, okay, wait a minute. She's worked in public accounting for 19 years, performing what a public accountant would do. If she passed the exam, why wouldn't we license her? So that's NPAG's kind of third, and they know that there's lots and lots of breakage with that. So what NPAG's trying to do is, okay, here's something that gets us, that addresses this issue right now with kind of where everybody is, but maintains mobility. Let's do that. Let's focus on that now. Then we're going to focus on maybe stuff that breaks stuff. And it is pretty interesting that, as you said, as we understand it, Texas is 150 or better. There are other states that have totally shifted the other direction. The West Coast is we're part of that shift. And other places too. Sherry, what if I leave out?
It's such a moving target from where our board talked about all of this at our May 1st board meeting to the conversation that we will have on June 20th. So much change in this time. So, I can't speak on behalf of the board, but I would just say, our board, members of our board, and I'm not saying all of them, but members of our board are recognizing all of these national discussions. There's, to Jason's point, a lot of conversation on the West Coast and a lot of serious consideration about how all this looks, encouraging the Board of Accountancy to continue these conversations And that was one of, I talked about that at the last board meeting, that, in January, the OSCPA board, basically voted that they were in support of the Board of Accounts and continue these national and local conversations. So as we come back in a few weeks, we'll have more to talk about today, I know. I expect our board to have further conversations about, just what are they supporting now compared to 6 weeks ago, right? But everybody recognizes there's a pipeline problem and that we need some solutions to get to.
So to wrap up all the items under the informational stuff, right? What really, really is the fundamental takeaway for this board, for the policy question that is about to come your way, really policy questions. There's two fundamental difficulties that we have to grapple with as a board based on that environment, right? One is the fluidity, right? We are in a really tough spot because we're trying to figure out what it is that we bring to the 2025 session, right? At a time when things are enormously fluid, right? So that's policy challenge number one. And that's its own challenge, in addition to the other piece that Joe talked about at the very beginning, which is where is exactly that line between specificity versus rulemaking authority for the board in that context, right? And those are both pretty highly charged questions. And inside that, I just want to give you one reminder that you have in that line item on Pacific University, where you didn't have any materials in your packet. And I wanted to just cover that orally because it was
Yeah, can I say one?
Yeah,
Sorry to
please.
interrupt, but because I'm like, I know this is really for the policy thing, but like, it's a 2025 legislative session. That kills me. Right? And so we're talking about a pipeline issue and conversations that honestly, we should have been having 5-6 years ago.
Well,
And it's like, did you see the California numbers? It's like, it's frightening. And so when we talk about it, and I think it's where we go from here, it's almost like I want to show a little video of like how a bill becomes a law.
yeah, it
Because,
takes 10,000 years.
yeah, so we're all from private sector. And so this stuff drives me nuts. Let's make a decision and do it. And so we have to, I know we have to follow a certain process here, but the timing it takes matters a great deal in this. And so I appreciate the work like NPAG has done, and it's interesting hearing about, and I forget whatever acronym, NASBA's
SPP.
SPP, yes, that one have done, but like at what point are they going to come up with a solution and actually start action on it, right? And so what we have to decide is, well, if they come up with the solution and then we're like, how do we get that actually in our statutes? How many years does that take? It's insane.
Right.
And at what point, I'm like, I might be retired at that point. I don't know. And so at what point have we actually helped? And so just want to lay that out there from a discussion standpoint of like, we can have just one sec, Jason, but I mean, like, we actually have to act, right? And so we can do legislative concepts if we're doing our own path. And I think there's a way to do that, or we can do less specificity so we can be adaptable. And I know that's later for our discussion, but I just wanted to set that for the table. Jason, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt. It was to ask permission to make a comment if I might.
Yeah, and then I think we'll take a break because no one's kicked me. Everyone's far away, but I bet people are wanting to.
It will be quick.
Yeah.
As we started this conversation, again, this is Jason person, not anything I'm associated with. As we started this, I'm a tax practitioner. I'm accustomed to statute and rule. I'm accustomed to being nervous about taxing authorities and how they interpret things. I'm nervous by nature that way. And I was nervous about not having certain things in statute with regard to my practice in our state. as I sat and listened to what AICPA said and what the NPAG said, this river is not a stagnant river. This river is moving, and it is moving fast. To allow the state of Oregon to do what it needs to do for our profession, my personal belief is that taking certain things out of statute and granting the board the ability to do things by rule is the right answer, much as Congress does when they write law and then grant Treasury the right to write statutory regs or promulgate regulation. That's not where I was 3 months ago. It's where I am now. It's not where I was a month ago. That's where I am now. We need less specificity in statute and more ability for the board to write rule. It's moving too fast. And will continue to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. All right, break time. Good. All right, sorry to cut you off. We'll go
No,
back to
that's great.
specific, but
That was important.
perfect. Make sure everyone's back on Zoom. Right, perfect. Let's keep moving. I think we were on to item D, which was
I have a
yeah,
comment.
oh, go ahead, Raul.
If you would, thank you. I just want clarification of Jason, right? Jason, your last comment about allowing us to do what we need to do by rulemaking, is that equivalent to as when Congress allows an agency to go ahead and make their own rules and it goes almost like they're the regulation and Congress is steps out of the picture?
So in that example, Congress sets, here's what needs to happen. Broad, now specifics, Treasury can go in and do, and say specifically, but here's what we want to have happen. Now Treasury go in and be specific. As I understand it, for example, with the 12150, the majority of states, and Martin, correct me if I'm wrong, the majority of states don't have that baked in statute. It's in rule. So for example, moving that out of statute and allowing that to be in rule instead would allow this body to keep up with changes that are happening in the country right now.
In real time.
In real time.
I'll make it time.
Yeah.
It is closer, right? It's closer.
Which
Which is
is
very different than
which is
legislative time.
Yes.
extremely faster than legislative time.
Right, okay.
And there are times that legislative time works great. And there are other times when things are moving so quickly. Perhaps rule is a better option for the profession. There are risks on both sides.
I mean, it's highlighted by the fact that a year ago, we sat here and kind of decided what's our path forward and have spent the last year with LRC and, getting as much as we can done through rule, but looking at 25 for, it's a 2-year process on that front. And
Okay.
I mean, it's a good thing we decided then to be kind of on the forefront of some of these changes, even though we were like, oh no, but we shouldn't have to look into the future quite that dramatically.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Any other comments before we keep moving? We're going to come back to this and in item 3, so we're going to have a larger roundtable discussion. But Martin, do you want to keep?
Yeah, and I'm quite frankly, I'm almost done. I'm trying to be as quick as I can, kind of painting what has been an incredibly busy 4 months since the last board meeting. The only thing I really want to add, in addition to yielding to Jason in terms of updating you on the LRC and kind of where we're at there, is I had a conversation that with Pacific University, where Pacific University called me and basically expressed distress as to, where they're at with respect to our statutes and rules. And I was really, really surprised by that, because I felt like, hey, all we've been doing is making things easier, why is there a distress stop call coming from Pacific University? So I sat down with them, and it turned out to be a really excellent lesson into what you have heard me talk about, is that public policy is the law of unintended consequences. This turned out to be one of them, right? And this actually goes back to, and by the way, full appreciation to OSCPA taking the lead on this. This actually goes back to the 23 legislature on the 120 to sit legislation in House Bill 2523, where it turned out that Pacific University is a very small program, very small accounting program, right? But they are very into like trying to make sure that their students make it all the way to the pipeline, and they really built kind of a we will make sure you get licensed as a CPA type program. And they realized that this additional 30 hours in the 150 model had become a barrier to their students. And one of the ways they wanted to address that barrier was they changed their program from having people graduate at 120 semester hours to not have them graduate and get their bachelor's until the 150. And the reason for that is that it opened up significantly greater opportunities for financial aid eligibility for their students. So they did that step as, they took that step essentially from an advocacy perspective for their students to make it easier for them to get through the pipeline, right? Now comes House Bill 2523, which was simply intended to lower the number of semester hours at which you could take and sit the exam. What they didn't realize, and what we did not know about, and what OSCPA, I'm pretty sure, also did not know about, is that by only changing the semester hour requirement and retaining the, and I emphasize 3 times, statutory level requirement of a bachelor's degree, the unintended consequence happened when that bill passed, that now Pacific University students actually can sit for the CPA exam at 120 hours because they won't have the bachelor's degree that the statute requires, right? So that was an entirely unintended consequence, right? Everybody was trying to do the right thing. They were trying to do the right thing by their students, right? And it still ended up backfiring, which is a great lesson in sometimes specificity at the level of statute can backfire. And here it did, right? Nobody wanted this. So it's also a conversation that unfortunately happened after the LRC. Otherwise, I would have had a chance to talk with Jason about bringing this up at the LRC and formally, working through that issue at the LRC level. But I wanted to bring it up here, number one, just so that you also know, it's difficult to fix things once you have things set in statute, right? Because now, in order to fix this for Pacific, it literally means we would have to go back in and take a couple of words out of 673.050 and essentially deal with, essentially give us some greater flexibility in rulemaking so that all of our candidates in the pipeline can actually sit for the CPA exam at 120 semester hours, right? So it was just an interesting reminder of kind of what some of the real life outcomes can be, where you have wonderful intentions behind, legislation that's specific, and it still ends up causing problems in the process. So I wanted to just at least report on that piece. Obviously, I couldn't make any promises to Pacific University. I can't get ahead of the board or the legislature there, but they were at least grateful that I was able to tell Pacific University that at this time, all of the conversation is about additional options for licensure, not throwing 150+1 model out the door that we have right now, which would create really significant problems for them because they really wrapped their entire program around the 150 semester hour structure. So I wanted to just throw that out there. And beyond that, I think that pretty much, the only other thing I can say is there's still stuff going on in states. The Minnesota bill is actually dead for this session. Remember, they were the first ones out the door with alternative pathways. That bill, for reasons I want to emphasize that have nothing to do with the bill itself, died. There were some very unique circumstances in Minnesota, and I'll say that very gently publicly, because it was just an extremely unusual end of session in the Minnesota legislature that were dynamics around, I think, either a criminal indictment or conviction, I forget what it was, of one of the legislators, created some really just unusual end of session dynamics that were really chaotic. And in that chaos, that bill essentially went sideways for reasons that had nothing to do with the bill. So don't read anything substantively into the demise of that legislation. There were other things.
Google that on your computer later.
Yeah. So anyway, so there's that, but other than that, it's still this very fluid picture in terms of what's going on in the states. And you have some that are already individually moving forward on the 120 piece, 120 plus 2, really. And so there is a significant amount of pressure in the system in terms of when is the dam going to break. And we're going to have, right now, it's still process, right? But we're not that far away in time where a jurisdiction will become the first to add something other than 150 plus 1 to the equation.
Do we know how widespread the situation at Pacific University is dealing with is?
Widespread in terms of how many students?
Yeah, well, I mean, how many students for them, but then potentially how many other universities in Oregon? I mean,
I think that Pacific is pretty unique in the way that they structured this. I don't know, Logan, if you, from the higher ed perspective, have a broader insight in that. That's my gut take. Do you feel differently?
That's the only instance I've heard of such an arrangement. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not uncommon. There's other, master's degree arrangements that are impacted, but not to such degree as Pacific.
Yeah, so it is a small impact, which is, I don't want to make this about Pacific University per se. It was really meant more as a generic, it's really that scalpel issue of where we deal with specificity versus staying away from it can make a big difference. But the group impacted, I will be honest, is very small, right? But that said, we care about everybody.
right. Yeah, no, I was just thinking, I mean, it might just be that they need to modify their program back to, what it was before, right? I mean, not ideal on their part, but I don't know if it would warrant changing something like that globally if it's impacting a small group, I guess.
Even if we, I agree. I mean, even if we can correct something to help, they might want to look at that long-term. Fixing that at the same time.
It's also, it's not that we're making them worse off per se, it's that we're not helping those students as much as we'd like to.
Exactly.
It's a different kind of framework.
Yes. All right. Are you good if I turn it over to Jason for the LRC?
Yeah, and I think, because we've kind of already covered E and F, so, go ahead, Jason.
So you've got what we've worked through so far. Private equity is out there as one of the things that we'll be talking about. Do you want a brief discussion of what's happening in private equity? Is the board comfortable with what's happening there? Or comfortable in your knowledge of what's happening here?
We haven't had a discussion at the board level around the private equity piece here yet, so it'll probably be good to level set it a little bit. And I don't know how much of that, you feel comfortable covering. I'm happy to help as you need.
I can cover some just to know. So we did propose to change with regard to ESOPs. BDO was in the news for doing that within the last 12 months, I think. I learned at AICP Council that actually it was done 10 years ago by somebody else. So it's not brand new. Private equity is newer, and I'm in a smaller firm, and I've had private equity costs. So that's going to be an interesting effect on our profession. Grant Thornton just did it. They're getting theirs finalized now. They are the second of the 10 largest firms in the country to take private equity in the past 12, 18 months. One of the questions there is ownership structure. Another question is one of my questions, why me personally, I would not do it. It would be good for me personally. The reason it's happening is for years, getting people out of public accounting firms like me, the old guys who were, I'll be 60 this year, was on some sort of a deferred comp, et cetera, and you move them out. It's shifting to fair market value. If it's fair market value, where do you come up with the money? Private equity. So private equity comes in and buys, good for me, the guy that's getting out. But then private equity is going to run it, even if they have a minority stake, they're going to have a very large voice in how my firms run. Very large voice. What does that do with regard to our services and how we serve and frankly public protection? I'm not suggesting that corners would be cut, but they're all about making money. Then the question is, private equity is generally in 5 to 7 years. Private equity comes in, they buy firm X, 5 to 7 years is up, now what? Who do they sell to? Another private equity group that squeezes some more out? Or do they sell now to up and coming people within the existing firm? Don't know, but it's happening and happening. I was surprised that I had 2 phone calls from the same guy, and I told him no twice. So that's out there. We haven't really talked about that from laws and rules to make any kind of suggestion to the board yet. We need to talk through it, but that's something that the board should think about as well. I believe Martin has had conversations with people considering this and what potentially that could do to firm licensure and firm licensure issues that could cause in the state of Oregon. Different states have different licensure requirements for firms. And as I understand the Oregon licensure requirements, if I just have a tax firm run by a bunch of CPAs, I still need to be licensed in the state of Oregon. And so if private equity comes in and they parse things up to where the existing owners still own the assurance practice, now private equity owns a big chunk of this other practice, it's the tax practice and consulting. Do they have issues? So that's one of the things that we will be looking at is private equity.
And I have had a quick conversation with Angie when she was still here, and Joe committing us to having that discussion at the September board meeting. Because that's a really going to be a really interesting one for us in Oregon, because as Jason just indicated, right, we've had a very long-standing practice to be part of those states where there is a broader definition of public accountancy that very much includes tax and advisory and other services as part of that definition, right? And so while not all these private equity deals are all the same, there are differences in terms of the types of proposals that are out there. Many of them involve, what they use that term alternative practice structure that you just basically described at a high level. And in essence, it's predicated upon an assumption that public accountancy is limited to the attest and compilation function, right? That's really what it's kind of predicated upon, and basically says, okay, we're not going to touch that piece. That's the public accounting piece. Private equity doesn't touch that. The other parts of the firm split up into another structure under different boards, slightly different name. And that's the one where private, equity essentially comes in, usually then not as a minority stakeholder, but as a majority stakeholder. And essentially for us, it presents a really interesting challenge because I'm not exactly sure to what extent at the national level there is awareness that there is actually a huge differential amongst individual jurisdictions around these different laws and rules. And it was really interesting to me, and we'll, get into that a little bit more in September. There were 2 firms so far that I've been in very gentle touch with, just saying, hey, help us understand how this, how what you're doing is, in compliance with, essentially the statutes and rules that we currently have, right? And I got a very generic response that you'll see that we're kind of work through, in September, that clearly to me seemed to be written at the national level, broad perspective, describing the alternative practice structure and completely avoiding the topic of what the specific laws and rules were in Oregon, right? Didn't address that piece, these responses, right? And so I don't know to what extent that, I don't want to read between the lines as to what that means, right? But it means we're going to have to figure out how are we going to respond to that here, right? Because it's clearly something that's coming, but for us, it presents a little bit of a different environment than in those states that essentially have a very different approach and essentially have no problems limiting themselves to saying public accounting is really just about a test and everything else is kind of outside of the equation, right? So there is no unity nationally, which makes this a harder discussion for us. But we'll talk about that part more in September. So what we did do, Jason, is essentially in your materials for today, out of the LRC is an endorsement of language that was drafted by Angie on the issue of the employee stock ownership plans, which is something we have talked through at the LRC level and was, I think, recommended out by the LRC. That's in your packet. So,
and the inactive status is in the packet.
Inactive status is in the packet, right? As is, and I don't know, I want to put words in your mouth, but basically, from my perspective, a super high level summary I would have is what's coming out of the LRC is this balancing act, right? That in essence says, we're going to keep the 120 semester hours in statute and do as much as possible avoid specificity beyond the 120 semester hours so that we can give ourselves room to maneuver, right, in rule. And one of the most fundamental questions we're going to have to discuss here in a moment is that the right balance to strike, right? And Logan, I forgot to give you a heads up on this, but I would love any insights that you have from the higher ed perspective, because there seem to be, I keep hearing rumors, but I'm not tied in to the stuff that's not about a conversation that doesn't seem to be specific to Oregon or even specific to accounting, but just these general kind of chatter in higher education about moving away from 120 semester hours as a standard for a bachelor's degree. And what that's going to do for us, down the road. That's one of my big question marks around this. Where is higher ed really going? Are we setting ourselves up for going back to the legislature if you write the 120 in there, right? So I would love to hear what you think about that piece. But that's essentially in terms of the LRC. I kind of view it kind of as a balancing act right now. But we don't know yet whether it's the right balancing act.
But it's our best view at the moment, given facts that are constantly changing.
I'm happy to do that an hour later. Your discussion.
Do you mind just, since we're on it, do you know off the top of your head kind of what's going on out there?
Yes, the dominant question arises for schools who rely heavily on a master's degree as part of their program. And there's quite a number of universities that the accounting master's degree is quite important to them. And sometimes they'll strategically alter the requirements of students. Pacific's a good example of that, where you prevent a student from graduating just so they kind of have to stay for 5 years. So a lot of schools are doing things where their undergraduate accounting degree, for instance, does not give enough core credits to sit for the CPA exam. Right? And to access those extra credits, they need to take the master's degree. Right. And so there's a lot of efforts towards, whether it's like written through rules or just more like counseling students, to try to get students to stay for that 5th year and do a master's degree. And so those universities have an interest in preserving the 150 rule to support their master's degree enrollments. Where their self-interest and where their interest in like fiduciary responsibility to students like ends, it is hard to pin down. So that's something for the board to keep in mind whenever there's any kind of lobbying or whatever you want to call it. That is an element there that many schools have. And OSU is kind of one of the rare ones where we don't have a master's program in accounting. So that's and then overall, yeah, I think the other kind of element that is important to just accounting academics in general is to be really cautious about setting the borderlines between like transcript visible credits and these other kind of alternative pathways where we're trying to get like internship credits or online credits that are sponsored by firms, like preserving like quality of like on transcript credit. And we hold that to be pretty sacrosanct, right? And if we have these alternative pathways, it creates an incentive for for people to work full time, to think they can finish 30 semester credits in a year as they're working full time in the first job. And you look at this and it's not a possible way to have rigorous instruction. It just doesn't add up. The price points don't add up. This ELE proposal from NASBA, the price point there is $150 a credit. That's really low, and you couple all these things together and it just makes us academics like really worried about watering down the idea of like transcript accounting.
Okay. With that,
All right.
where does that leave you?
Thank you, Jason.
On 120.
I'm very, speaking for myself, of course, very pro 120.
Okay.
I think, and this is something that I think maybe my first board meeting here this topic was at hand. And if you look at the way things are structured, where we have the 30 extra semester credits unspecified in what they are, right? It becomes a test of whether an individual has money and time. There's no content we're requiring. There's very little evidence that makes people better CPAs. And so it seems like, frankly, like an unjust kind of approach, right? You either have 120 or you have 150, and those extra 30 semester credits have to be a major that's related or a master's or like something that's meaningful and you could say there's evidence to support it being beneficial. Otherwise, it's barrier that doesn't have a benefit.
I think there's that MIT study that was done that backs that comment up, right? The additional 30 hours, shows that it doesn't create better CPAs, but it does create significant roadblocks.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there are also studies that do find some support for a master's helping. I have to go back and look, but so that distinction is critical.
Sure, we could find a study to tell us whatever we want. Well, I said the MIT
as academic research,
in my opinion.
But right. Yeah.
All right, any other comments? Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jason. Let's see, I think we're on to item 3 now. So roundtable discussion. So 3A, implications of developments with respect to draft recommended by the LRC. So comments, questions, anything you want to lead us through here, Martin?
No, I mean, this is where the tables get turned and I stop talking, right? Because what I've tried to do is give you context with, Jason's help and with Jason's help and Logan's help on what all has happened. I think it emphasizes how incredibly fluid this picture is, right? You have the language draft in there, the current state, right? You have the California piece in there around what they're thinking about in terms of a 2-year pathway and 2-year supervised pathway and 1-year supervised experience pathway. Kind of what their thoughts are. But at this point, it's really up to the board to figure out, does this strike the right balance that we have, you know, in terms of the language that's coming out of the LRC? Because in essence, and this kind of jumps ahead to 1C, right? One of the most critical things we need to do, and I'm actually going to tie this back to the comments you made, Joe, right? About, you know, your very understandable frustration of we should have been there 6 years ago addressing this stuff, and we're talking about 25 legislature, and how long is it going to take, right? And while I will diplomatically say that I don't share Joe's frustration about the legislative process, just because I'm a product of that side of the equation for close to 40 years, I actually end up in the same place as Joe, right? Which is, I've never lost a bill in the legislature, and I don't intend this to be the first one. And the way to get there is to make sure that we all stay united, especially locally, right? And that's why this next discussion is so critical, because the pathway, which is item C under 3C here, is we know that there is a board meeting, a regularly scheduled board meeting coming up for OSCPA on June 20th. And it's very critical, from what we know from OSCPA, that they have a specific language set that they can look at and react to make sure that we have really a specific proposal, not just general conceptual conversation, but a really specific proposal where essentially they have an opportunity to say, yes, we're comfortable, or no, we're not, right? And get that into that board meeting so that by the time we get back together for our noon meeting on July 17, right, which is going to be primarily about finishing this legislative work, right, that we have both feedback from OSCPA for the July 16 LRC that we scheduled and the July 17 board meeting. So that's the kind of the sequence. And the sequence is very much intended to give us an opportunity to really have public and transparent conversations about where are we at. And we need to have really clear feedback from this board around, are you comfortable with this language? Does it strike the right balance that's coming out of the LRC? Because then the next step is to essentially do the circle back. Is to do the circle back and get feedback, number one, into the OSCPA meeting, and then quite frankly deal with some remaining language drafting issues we haven't yet had a chance to deal with, that have waited for essentially Angie's return on July 1, that have to do with potential simplification of a couple of 1 or 2 other statutory sections around firms. If we can get there, right? If we can pull that off still. But the goal is to get us to a consensus place, because if we get to a consensus place, then I can solve one small part of Joe's complaint, which is if we get to consensus, we have a significant chance of getting this bill through the legislature and not going quite the forever route. And by the way, one of the things, although we have to be careful about not biting off more than we can chew, we can have a conversation once we have the policy discussion about where are we at, right? We can actually have a second, much more technical discussion about which pieces will be ready to implement early. So keep in mind, 25 legislature, Unless you write something specific into the legislation, it means a legislative effective date of January 1 of 2026, right? So the normal piece, unless we ask for something different, right, is that if we don't write anything in there, it means we need to be ready to have rules implementing pieces, rules in place by January 1 of 2026. If we want something sooner, and if we want something to be effective sooner, we can write essentially into the legislation, we can propose that either a section of the bill or multiple sections of the bill have an earlier effective date. That's a technical discussion. I'd like to save that piece until we're through with the policy discussion, but there are a couple of pieces where we can essentially, if we feel like if we have the capacity to essentially put an extra, foot on the gas pedal, if you will.
Okay. This is a time for open discussion. I think everyone probably knows my opinion. Gonna open it up. Any questions? Anyone kind of want to start with comments? Haley, you always have good thoughts. I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, I mean, I think I've said a lot of the things before. I mean, I think that it's really interesting to contemplate clearing the slate, if you will. Jason talked about, but there are some things that cause a little bit of discomfort from a transparency standpoint, potentially. But yeah, I mean, I think we just need to keep moving, make it as fast as we can. I mean, we're talking about the river flowing fast and it's not going to slow down. I mean, we're not going to go back in time. And, in accounting firms and our profession, we kind of like to move at a glacial pace. It feels comfortable, but it's not where we're at.
Anything we can do to address the transparency concern? I'm not exactly sure.
So it feels, because it feels simpler. It's like, it feels like when we're, the rulemaking process, we put it out for exposure and all the comments. I don't know if, I feel like practitioners or CPAs may view rules as less substantive and may ignore that opportunity more so than a legislative change. Is really the education around that piece. And so not intentional lack of transparency, more perception of the significance of what's happening and will people be engaged in can we get away with more stuff?
Yeah.
Feels like it'll be easier to get away with stuff. Not that anyone's trying to get away with anything, but that's the only kind of piece of are we setting ourselves up for some kind of, we'll be following all of the rules around it, of course, around rulemaking. But it feels like an opportunity for.
And you're speaking in removing specificity, right?
Correct.
Statutes?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll just say that's where I'd like to head.
Yeah.
That's my position and my opinion for a while now.
Right.
I agree with you. I think, but doing that, I acknowledge and to what Martin's saying, you have to do it in a united front. I think we have a lot of work to do there. I think it's the right answer, but we might not get there. I'd be willing to, but I'd like to try. And it's going to take work from a communication standpoint to understand the reasons of why we want to do that. It's because it's going to create flexibility in our profession. We're going to have more adaptability to make changes more rapidly.
Yep.
And I think if people understand that, they would see that, right? But people probably say, well, hey, this board has the ability to, abuse power or do things that that they don't like. But at the same time, we just had a rulemaking hearing where anybody could have come and spoke.
Yeah.
we listen, we take all those comments seriously, whether it's, another CPA, whether it's one of our partners through the OSCPA, the OAIA. I mean, all of those things are taken into account. And so like, much of this is all going to happen after I'm gone, right? And at some point, Martin's not going to be there. For me personally, like, I trust my colleagues in the profession that they're going to do the right thing. So I just believe that.
I completely agree with you. I mean, it goes back to kind of when we talk about supervisory, like who's supervising whom, and sort of like we're relying on each other to do that. And it feels like we're competent to do that. I mean, the bigger thing that it allows us flexibility on is, we have a competency exam. And so at what point does the education requirements become somewhat moot? But I mean, but like, in Jason's colleagues, case, probably a very, very qualified CPA that doesn't have a bachelor's of accounting and therefore is not eligible. Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you that clearing the slate and, taking out a lot of the specificity is the way to go. And it feels very like front edge of the trend.
Yeah, sorry, Logan Ricketts.
Yeah, I think that the public interest is served by us having more flexibility in this environment. But we shouldn't be blind to the downsides of that. I think, and Haley alluded to them some already. But there will be a future board, and in 20 years, none of us will be on the board.
Right.
And there could be a scenario where there is now a glut of CPAs. And that board looks at that and maybe considers some sort of anti-competitive, rulemaking whereby they increase the credit requirement, right? And so we shouldn't be naive to the incentives faced by a future board. And we should treat any departures from statute for very substantial elements of regulation. We should treat that as like something that we should, take departures from that thoughtfully and with good reason, right? And so I don't know if there's any kind of aspect of how that is done that this kind of thinking influences. I don't know what's possible in terms of there could be a special time period over which, we have more rulemaking authority. And then once states converge, it goes back into statute, right? So I just encourage people to think about the negative consequences that could arise.
And how does, and maybe I should know this, but how does that change? Like what would our process be to make a change, and how does it differ from the current legislative? I mean, understanding that it has to go through the legislature, but outside of there's a period of public comment, what exactly changes in terms of process and public's ability to comment on things?
You mean legislation versus rule?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the legislature, you have essentially an opportunity to show up at a hearing and provide input. You can, write your local legislator. You can seek a meeting with your local legislator. There's essentially somewhat different ways in which, Sean, Hugh citizen can essentially input opinions into that process. The rulemaking process, in contrast, is a lot more formal, right? Because obviously we have regular public comment opportunities at every one of our meetings where people can show up and comment on anything, right? But when it comes to rulemaking, the irony actually is that the rules and regulations around rulemaking are actually stricter in terms of the type of input and what can occur during rulemaking than what happens in the legislature, just because you have a lot more vantage points, right? You can meet with the legislator individually, you can do public testimony, you can have a private conversation, you can work through an interest group. There's, lots of different options that you have there. So I'm not sure that I feel comfortable comparing them from a transparency standpoint, but I feel much more comfortable talking about it as the processes, the type of venue that you have to give input
Can you
is
compare the
different.
timing, Mark? Sorry to interrupt you, but like this is the timing, right? From the rule process, we have a lot more control over that.
Sure.
And we can, within our own rules for calling meetings, I mean, we've done this a couple of times where we say if we've gone through this process where we've had, public input, we've said we've had 1 hour meetings to actually adopt these rules to get them in place.
Yeah.
Whereas a legislative change, I mean, if we're talking about 2025 right now, I mean, I don't want to sound stupid, so I'm gonna have you explain it, but like we have to get a legislator to actually pick up the bill. They can only take so many bills, right? And it's.
But in this case, we're talking agency request legislation, so technically we don't have to find a legislator for this because we're actually working this through the executive branch process. But generally, Joe is absolutely right? Number one, it's a much slower process, much slower, and it is fraught with risk. Things can happen in the legislature. I mean, remember what I talked about happened in Minnesota, right? Stuff happened that had absolutely nothing to do with the content of the bill, right? And it
In
derailed
part,
the bill.
probably because of all those entry points that people can, you know.
Well, entry points, and it's a very risky process, right? Rulemaking process means you have I don't want to say guaranteed because you still have to have a working board and a working process, but you have a far greater degree of assurance that you'll be able to respond to what the profession needs, right? With the legislature, there is always a significant amount of risk that you're actually going to be able to get out of that process what you need, right? And that's in addition to the timing issue, because you could be facing a 27 legislature and a 28 effective date if something goes sideways in the 25 session.
Yeah. So what's interesting, right, is you take it through a legislative path and you have a bunch of risk for what would be, in my mind, it's the Board of Accountancy. It's pretty non-controversial. So.
Well, and it's nuanced for a very specific part of the population that
Absolutely,
has,
right? Yeah,
has interests that.
We understand the significance of it. The larger population does not or does not care.
Mr. Chair, I think we may have another member. Who
Yes, I was gonna, I
joined.
think that was Claire, I believe you just joined. Would you mind just announcing yourself just for the record, please?
You bet. Claire Schulte is joined.
Okay, yeah, thank you for joining us. We're just in public session right now during a work session.
Okay.
Oh.
The rulemaking process. So we decide something and we move some through process and it's done. Where does that get overruled at any point, or can it at the executive level?
Yes. So rulemaking process, you follow, this is by statute, you follow it. People can challenge the rules in the appellate courts. So if someone thinks, for example, you just passed a rule that there was no statutory authority for you to do, or they think you didn't follow the statutes that govern the process, they can appeal that up to a court and they will look at that.
Yeah. And I think the thing I would add to that is we historically have followed the least risky process of rulemaking. So we make sure that we go through absolutely all the steps that eliminate the potential for procedural changes. So that has to do with technical elements of when something gets officially published in a bulletin, making sure you have a rulemaking hearing, making sure it is no sooner than 21 days after it's published. There's all kinds of technical behind the scenes pieces that we put into place to kind of limit the potential for those pieces. So that's the more legalistic part. But it also reminds me, kind of going back to your concern around transparency, right? And I now understand much better what you meant by it. Haley, I do also want to say we are not minimalist around transparency either, right? So what we talked about in terms of sending out, in this case, 18,000 emails to folks so that they can comment on our rulemaking. You may recall when I talked about survivors of the LRC process that we held 2 town halls just before rulemaking last year so that we could connect with the community. We're essentially trying to bring as much transparency into the rulemaking process as is possible, right? But I know that that doesn't fully, I understand your point, that still may not address that our licensees may not take the rules piece as seriously as the statutory piece. But we do try to both mitigate on the risk side of rulemaking as well as on the transparency side.
Since it's work session, it's okay to comment.
I would love for you to comment, yeah.
Yeah, I've been around with the society and working with members in a lot of capacities for a lot of years. There's pros and cons that have been shared with me from members. So when it comes to statutory, you've all explained very, eloquently how long it takes, and that is the pro. The con is the con. The pro side of that is some folks feel more comforted by that because it seems very strong, right? When it comes to the rulemaking where some people can get itchy, is that, and I'm not talking about Board of Accountancy, so in what I'm about to say, but it can get itchy because, even though there's a process for rulemaking and there's input placed into that, it's not always that input is heard or implemented. Does that make sense? Sometimes, to your point, Haley, ignored, frankly. So that's what gets people itchy. And when I say that, I hear some of those comments because of like public hearings for, community projects, like road expansion and all kinds of people will talk about different things. But I know at the end of the day, that also, that thinking comes around towards their feelings as licensees too, So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do the rules, not saying that at all. And this is a personal comment now at this point. What I appreciate about the process over the last few years that is, expanded from even Martin, when you were here the first time, is that mass communication. And it's like, reaching out to OSCPA. And frankly, I appreciate the fact that you reach out to OAIA as well in the process. So getting all that opportunity for feedback. This is the first time for me in viewing all of the comments in rulemaking that I mirror your comment, Martin, that the positives were so there. It was just like positive, positive, positive. So personally, I feel like the board's on the right track. And I know that a board cannot speak nor make action, on behalf of a future board. But, I think if that, for the Oregon board, if the culture and the flavor and the history and the principles, all of those things are in place, I would suspect that would give some folks that worry more comfort. And again, those are my comments, not OSCPA's. They're just, from what I hear from people.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, Adam, your hand's up.
Yeah, if this is an appropriate time for comment, I'd like to echo a lot of what Sherry said there. I also can't speak on behalf of the whole OSCPA board, but as one of its members and as a licensee, I really see the value of the flexibility and nimbleness that having these requirements in rule allows this board and allows our state to, keep up with what's developing nationally. Due to the what legal counsel already explained and what others have said, I think there's plenty of safety valves for, a future instance in which a board, does go rogue or, does, implement requirements that aren't the consensus requirements that, potentially would jeopardize substantial equivalency or something like that. Both legal challenges in court. And at the end of the day, organizations or individuals can also lobby the legislature for legislation that could override, a future board's actions if they were really out of step. So I think there's plenty of there's plenty of controls, I guess, in place. And I personally, think that, this is the right direction to head, that we have to be flexible and nimble as professionals and as a profession if we're going to increase membership in our profession. And so And the other component is, I think several people have mentioned, I think it's really important that the OSCPA and the board are in lockstep on this, that we're collaborating and going forward to the legislature with a proposal that we've all agreed on. And I'm happy to, advocate for this and make this case to the OSCPA board. And that's kind of my intention at our June 20th board meeting, because I really do feel like this is we're heading in the right direction here, and giving the board more flexibility is helpful in keeping us in step with the rest of the discussion. One just general comment, and I don't know, if this is legal or if this is something the board would consider, but I know that the transparency and sort of involvement that Martin has shepherded from the professional community in general, specifically OSCPA and the OAIA, has been really good. And if there's a way that the board, if the board wants to increase transparency in the rulemaking process, I think maybe even enshrining that community involvement, notification to specific organizations or notifications to all licensees, if it's not already required by the rulemaking process, like, in enshrining that in the board's own rules or rulemaking process or policies or however that's done, would, I think, go a long way towards showing that commitment to involving stakeholders and really taking stakeholder opinions into account, which I know you all do. I mean, I saw it this morning, and I know that that's part of the process. So again, I'm highly in support and look forward to personally, and look forward to advocating this to the OSCPA board and making sure that we can all move forward together. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. Just making sure, Jason or Stu, any comments? Look like Stu, Jason?
No, not from me at this time.
Okay, just want to make sure we're including you in the discussion here. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Question? Rob?
So Stu, you went off mute. Did you want to share something?
Well, I've listened to this whole thing, and unfortunately, I go back to the day back in 2000 when this whole thing started, and I guess I'm saying our experiment didn't work, and we're making such an issue out of the 150-hour rule when we used to be very happy with 120. The additional 30 was supposed to give you a more rounded accountant rather than the stereotype we normally had. Why can't we just unfold what we folded?
Joe still orders the same lunch every time, so his well-roundedness is clearly not.
Well, that's a good example.
And most people don't guess that I'm a CPA, so there's a lot worse out there.
Don't they?
But dang it. Yeah. But I think that's, Stu, I appreciate the comment. I think that's what I think it's consistent with what we're saying, right? We're removing specificities so we can do that. But having your perspective from being a part of changing that 20 years ago, or I guess almost 25 years ago, actually, right? There's going to be a future board that says, why on earth did they do this, right? And why make it difficult for them to change it if the profession changes and everyone agrees this makes sense? Let's not drag out process for it to happen. That's kind of where I'm at, because there's certainly, I just assume at some point they're going to say, what were they thinking in 2024? That board chair was something else.
Yeah, I generally agree with all the sentiments as well. It does bring me back, interestingly enough, to a point that we discussed at the beginning about board structure, right? I think by putting more power in our hands, it's even more important to ensure that we have appropriate representation on a board from the private sector, from academia, from, the public sector, all of that, just so that we couldn't, I don't know, lean too heavily one way that might prompt us to change something to our favor or something.
That's where people get, like, they have the comfort of something in the statute right now, right? And they worry about the board being able to do whatever they want. And I think that's part of what you were saying. And I'm like, I get the concern, but I also think there's enough safeguards in place. And I think Adam mentioned that would prevent that. And I also kind of just trust our colleagues in the profession that will not happen in the future. I just have more belief in our what we have in place from a structure standpoint and our profession in general. I personally don't share that concern. I get people would be concerned.
I was, what Stu mentioned, I was on the cusp of that. I got licensed I just swept in. I got grandfathered just in time. And so I heard that, and as a perspective from a viewpoint of getting more people in, it was hard enough back then. I thought so. The 120, the exam, the requirements to get the competencies. To me, it was hard enough. And then when I heard about, whoa, they got to go back to school, you know, these poor people coming in are and I heard all the stories. You know, I got to take all these classes now. I can't sit for the exam and blah, blah, blah. So from that perspective of getting people in, you know, I'm working with a gal who does not want to become a CPA. She'd be perfect. She'd be good, but she doesn't want to. Come on, go through the exam and through the extra courses. You know, and then just getting, you know, have a small firm, so small businesses, and I just sat with a couple yesterday delivering their tax return. They brought their daughter in, so I broached a conversation with her. She's going to OSU to become an accountant. So I asked her, so what got you to choose this? And she said, the money. And I sat there, I go, okay, well, this is someone, okay, she's going through the program, but you know, and I have somebody else on staff who loves accounting and is there because she likes it. And so it's a different flavor of people coming in. So I'm on board with, I like Stuart's version. Let's just flip the thing back to the way it was. It's hard enough. The exam, I think, is rigorous. And as far as controls and stuff, transparency, there's always risk. And we're CPAs. A lot of such things, you know, we deal with risk all the time. And what do? Do we get down to zero risk? We never get down to zero. There's always something that we've got to just live with. And I think we can live with this. From what I'm hearing, and I personally think so, we can live with, we're not going to make everybody happy. That's all there is to it. And Megan's comment about, you know, well, are people comfortable with what this board is doing or not doing? Well, part of that is getting people here and inviting them to join us. You know, just like voting. You know, you don't like what's going on in the country and you don't vote or you don't say anything, well, you know, just stay in your corner, don't comment. But if you really want to say something, show up to the hearing or apply to be on the board or on a committee and get involved. You know, but I think going back to the way it was and lifting that specificity, is that, did I say that right?
Specificity. I have to say it really slow.
Because we're all seeing there's not enough. I don't mind if there's a glut. Somebody mentioned a glut of.
That'd be a good problem to have.
Yeah, yeah, sure, yeah. I think that would be good, but right now we're on the other spectrum and we're feeling it. And I'm seeing it, you know, personally, people not wanting to join. That's all.
All right, thank you. Martin, so where are we trying to get to from here? Kind of, we're trying to,
I think,
just create direction for the LRC? Are we
Well,
trying to?
I think that based on the pathway, given the fact that we have essentially the sequences, we have a June 20th OSCPA board meeting and then a July 16 LRC board, right? It's kind of a two-step. So I think one clear direction that we need from this board, yes or no, or some variation, is you have a very specific language proposal in your packet that's called the LRC report out, something like that. Under, I can reference the exact agenda item, but it was the one Word document that you got in your, the one document that was not in PDF because I haven't yet figured out, this is my technical limitation about how to convert something to PDF without losing all the tracked changes. And the tracked changes in that document are really critical to help you follow what it is that's currently getting proposed and being reported out by the LRC, right? So one fundamental outcome that we need from this discussion, which goes back to this balancing act between specificity versus rulemaking authority, is what is in front of you language-wise. Is that a product that is comfortable with in terms of striking that balance? Does it go too far? Does it not go far enough? Or is that product something that we can say, here is something that we feel comfortable saying out to the public, including but not limited to OSCPA. This is where we're currently at in terms of language development, with the only asterisk being that we still have an attempt on issues we haven't really discussed here very much that the LRC needs to take up on the 16th. There's still an attempt out there in the sections of ORS 673-160, which is around firm registration, and ORS 673, I believe 320 off the top of my head. Those are the two really complex sections of statute where we've asked council to see, are there opportunities for us to simplify that language and do a little bit more by rule, because the 673-320 piece, and I don't mind saying it in a public meeting on the public record, is extremely challenging to read and understand and analyze because of all the double negatives and the way that language is written. It's extremely challenging for any practitioner and board members, lawyers, CPAs, it doesn't matter who it is. Everybody struggles with that language. So we're trying to see, can we simplify this a little bit? And the same thing, and Jason, please weigh in here. We had a bit of an initial discussion at the LRC around potential ways to simplify the firm registration language, right? And if I recall correctly, I think where we ended up was a direction to council in terms of language drafting that the LRC felt comfortable saying at this level of statute, what we should retain is the one common piece that you have in every jurisdiction around firm registration, which is around thou must register a firm if you provide services that fall under essentially a test, compilation, trigger, peer review requirement. And then that the remainder of firm registration requirements should be determined by rule. Is kind of where I think we ended up at the LRC level. We don't have that language for you yet, but the goal is to bring that language with Angie's help to the July 16 LRC and then to our July 17 board meeting. But I don't think this is kind of from a policy perspective. My takeaway is that this wasn't really intended to change policy as much as it was intended to provide some flexibility around what's in statute and what's in rule. But it does touch on the policy question of when does specificity help us at the statutory level and when it becomes a barrier. So there is still a little bit more work that is not in your current packet, that is still, if you will, under development, right? So I want to just say that for full disclosure reasons that we're not quite done, but the hard part is what's in your packet, right? And that's the one where I think we really need some feedback on. Are you comfortable with saying this strikes the right balance? Because if yes, then that puts me in a position and puts this board in a position where we can have a clear communication out, including to OAIA, including to OSCPA, and say, this is where this board is at. Can we maintain consensus with our community? right? If that feedback is otherwise, if whatever it is we send out of here, whether it's this or some variation of this, and we get feedback that there is a concern about this, that, or the other language, we will need to deal with it no later than the July board meeting. I'm not going to bother you with all my back end deadlines of what exactly I need to do by when to put what into the process. It's too detailed. I'm going to have to already do a little bit of fancy dancing because in theory, I have a June 14 deadline to actually put language into the system, but there is ways for me to delay that until the end of July, right? But effectively, just to be, without getting too personal, I literally have to get everything out the door the afternoon after our July 17 board meeting. I have a little bit of a medical thing going on, so I need to be out of here for a little while from the 18th onwards. So literally, I will have to use the afternoon of the 17th of July to take whatever comes out of that board meeting and shoot it off into the system with respect to language development. So I hope that makes sense in terms of what the ask is. Was that hopefully clear enough?
I think so. Everyone? Okay. Thoughts? Opinions?
Yeah.
We're on the right track?
Yep. Yeah, there was nothing that like led me that I thought, oh, this is too, I don't know, not the right direction or anything like that. I mean.
Agreed. Jason, Stu, any comments on that, the material? Okay,
No, I'm in agreement.
okay. Everyone else?
Stu, are you good?
Yeah, he was shaking his head.
Oh, okay.
Comments, yeah. All right, so then as far as just moving forward, do we need a motion for that then? Is that? Or just?
Technically, no, because I don't think we're gonna do the final until the July 17
Yeah.
board meeting, right? But it might be, the safer thing is always to do a motion to get us on the record that the board is essentially endorsing the draft, because it's still a draft, right? And we're still gonna have to go through legislative drafting, but essentially that the board is endorsing that draft and providing it to our stakeholders for feedback. Okay. So it'd be great to have a motion on that.
All right. Yeah, could I have a motion then to support the draft as presented and we can present to our stakeholders?
I move to report, to support the draft, the LRC report out, and to continue the work.
Perfect.
Second.
We have a second, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes. All right,
Perfect.
Thanks, that's a lot of
Yeah, tons of work.
stuff to get through, appreciate the discussion from everyone.
And in the interest of transparency, when we're talking about stakeholders, it goes beyond, just the inside Oregon. One of the things that I intend to do is to also work with folks at, quite frankly, NASBA, AICPA, California Board of Accountancy, Washington Board of Accountancy. I intend to get regional feedback as well as national feedback, because if there is churn, I want to know about it sooner rather than later. Right? I do think this strikes a very careful balance because, bluntly put, there is nothing in this language that would prevent us from saying to NASBA, this gives us room to adopt whatever final version they come up with under their SPP, but it also gives us room to go and, I forget who said it, unfold. Unfold what was folded and kind of create that 2-year supervised experience pathway, right? It allows for a variety of options underneath this tent, right? So it'll be interesting to see what feedback we get, but this vote puts me in a position of saying, react to this so that I can get a little bit of a feel for what's out there. And bring that back to our July conversation.
Perfect. All right, so that takes us, actually, before we move on, I'm just thinking ahead. What time do we have people slated to hear?
We need to make sure that we start exec session as close to noon as possible,
That's
because
what I'm
that's
getting
what we advertised out in terms of start of exec session. So we have about 25 minutes left.
And are we just gonna, eat and work through that? Or do we want to break soon and try to eat and then do that? Or I'm open to either one, but opinions from anybody?
I could keep going. Break later.
Okay, I mean, do we want to just,
I guess.
keep moving a little bit? And yeah, I mean, how many people do we have appearing? To be honest, I didn't even see the executive agenda and
Yeah, and we can't discuss it in too much detail. in
I
open
know,
session.
I'm just saying I didn't see it. So yeah, that's why I can't reference.
There are 6 people.
Okay, yeah, so let's keep moving because that takes a while. Yeah, all right. On to 3C, so the discussion of future approach to private industry MOUs, CPA candidate development. So,
Yeah.
Martin, you can probably.
I can tee this up a little bit,
Jason can.
and Jason, hopefully you can jump in here, but you may recall at the February board meeting, this issue came up very briefly because we had gotten requests from the community of private industry, and that actually also includes government organizations that essentially had established programs, no past tense, to kind of foster CPA candidates inside their communities, right? And that process was pretty tightly tied into our, what used to be a somewhat different process for private industry candidates, including going through the QC process, right? So we had these memorandums of understanding, and essentially with reporting requirements, and essentially an idea out there that these programs would help us essentially with fostering candidate development in these organizations, with reporting back out to, and quite frankly, really helping the QC do its work. So now we essentially made a policy decision as a board to really streamline and align all of our licensure pathways to be similar, including the ones from private industry and government. We did away with the QC, right? And so now we're getting questions from, quite frankly, very engaged and wonderful folks out in those communities saying, hey, what is the board's vision for us continuing our work, kind of fostering that next generation now that we are not supposed to be feeding into the QC process anymore. But the reality is, we're still here. We're still trying to foster, up and coming candidates for the pipeline in our organizations. What's the vision of the board to what's the next stage for these MOUs and the expectations that the board has, right? And at that point, Jason, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think essentially Jason is a graduate of one of the early versions of one of those programs, I believe out of the Department of Revenue. And essentially Jason asked for, this to be deferred to this board meeting so we would have a little bit of time to actually work through it, because we were, quite frankly, pretty out of steam at that point when that came up kind of on the fly at the February board meeting, and just kind of said, hey, we need to actually have a discussion around this. So Jason, I don't see you on camera right now, but can you kind of take it from here in terms of any insights in terms of what your ideas are? Uh-oh, maybe Jason wasn't here.
I'm here. You guys are just cutting out really bad. So.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Zoom keeps on telling me my network bandwidth is low. But.
So did you hear my introduction? Was that a fair overview of kind of where we're at?
I heard to the part where the people like revenue and those other areas are asking for what can you guys hear me?
No, not really. Do you wanna, if we're having network bandwidth issues, do you wanna call my cell? And I'll just put you on speaker in here.
I can call in through
Or
the stuff
through
that
Zoom, yeah.
chat. Yeah. So let me do that.
It's fine now, of course, the moment we say that we have technical trouble. It's a little bit like when you take your car to the mechanic. No longer making that noise. Are you seeing him come in?
Nope. Not yet. Now. Uh-oh.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait. Okay. Just gotta mute everything on my side. We should be good. Okay, should we continue the discussion?
Yeah. So Jason, do you want me to kind of level set this one more time? Were you able to hear enough of my intro?
No, I was not. So I apologize.
Okay, so at a super high level, Jason, I simply gave the board an overview of changes in our licensure program, aligning private industry folks with the way all of our other licensure works, the termination of the QC in that process, and essentially now having folks that are working in private industry and governmental organizations that have been under these MOUs tying into the QC process and essentially asking us how we should continue. Or what's the board's vision is for continuing this work, since clearly, we still have CPA candidates, thankfully, that are getting mentored and should be mentored in that process, right? But how do we want to update that framework since it's currently pretty tied into this QC piece that is no longer there? And then you expressed a desire at the February board meeting to kind of circle back here at this board meeting to kind of have a little bit of a discussion around this and also bring your perspective as a former graduate of, I believe, the DOR, Department of Revenue program.
Yeah, I wasn't a graduate. I actually was the one that started the program off.
Even better.
Yeah, they were in internal audits at the time. And when I left Department of Revenue, the 5 candidates that we graduated out of the program decided to go on their own and create an actual program with you guys that was more robust than what I ever had. That being said, we're trying to get more people into the pipeline, and this is just one of the avenues that we've touched upon, is streamlining this process and not making exceptions for those people that are outside the normal going to a CPA firm. I don't know that there's a need right now to reassess the MOUs that we have. I think that keeping those in place just allows us a touch base with potential candidates that'll be coming through those programs. And in that regard, it kind of, so we don't have like a puppy mill situation where there's other people outside of a CPA firm that are just trying to spit out CPAs as fast as they can to better their company in regards to that. The MOU process that we have isn't really a solid checkpoint, but it's a check-in, more or less. And in my opinion, I think we should keep that going, regardless of the QC committee continuing on.
So Jason, if I understand you correctly, when you say keeping it on, essentially just reframing it to be a more direct communication with the board directly rather than the QC?
Correct.
And if the board agrees with that, would you be willing to work with us offline to kind of redraft some of this stuff?
Definitely. I mean, do we feel like it's a necessity, or do we feel that we drop this and see what we get from our more open, competitive nature of allowing a streamlined process?
Everyone's looks like they're good with that, so I don't know if we need a motion there other than we appreciate your help with that and helping redraft those items offline. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
Anything else on this one?
Nope. I think that the only thing I would add to that is, with the board's direction to keep a structure going around this, which I'm actually grateful for, I will be honest and say that my personal impression is that as we mature more at the staff level and kind of get settled down from all the upheavals that we've had, I'd actually like to interject a little bit more life and attention into this, because my sense is that there are essentially places where these programs exist and do really good work. I actually think there's probably more places that could use programs like this. And I actually would like to figure out ways, as we craft kind of what we talked in very different contexts with this board around community outreach strategy for this board. I actually would like to tie that in a little bit, because to the extent that we can reach out, right now, what do we have, right? It's Nike, it's Cambria Health, it's Department of Revenue. Which one am I missing? I'm looking at my licensing folks here. Cambria, DOR, Nike, Lithia, and there's, I think, just one more, right? There isn't a ton of these out there, and I can't imagine that really covers the extent of private industry and government infrastructure in Oregon, right? So I actually think that there is room for growth here, and at some point, as we kind of settle in, I would actually love to build on, if the board essentially has now said, hey, we think this is valuable, we should keep this structure around, right? I actually would love to figure out how we can build on it a little bit. But quite frankly, because it could be another venue for us to, enhance the fostering of up and coming CPA candidates and getting them through the system. So that's just my personal perspective, that I would love to kind of put that on the radar, kind of strengthening that actually now if the board's comfortable keeping that construct.
I think we're all good. Okay, so is that okay? Am I speaking for everyone correctly here?
Yep.
All right, perfect. It's 11:51. What I want to try to do here, we covered 9A. So if we can get B and C, well, I guess we got D and E that we added as well. Maybe we can knock those out real quick, grab lunch and jump into executive session.
I will do it my very best. I'll do this fast, but you please slow me down because this is still an oversight.
I'll
board.
speed you up, yeah.
Okay. We're not, yes, one or the other. Okay. You may recall at the February board meeting, so I'm on 9B now.
Yeah.
I gave you all context and a heads up for essentially a sublease piece with the Board of Tax Practitioners. Where we're at right now process-wise is that just a few days ago, I got actual draft language from the Department of Administrative Services, right? I always feel, particularly when it comes to leases, that there needs to be accountability and board involvement when it comes to leases, even though this is, quite frankly, not exactly a huge moneymaker for us if you look at the numbers, right? But it's a nice little partnership with the Board of Tax Practitioners. You may have noticed on your way coming in that empty office that is closest to the boardroom, essentially slated to become the office for the executive director for the Board of Tax Practitioners. And then we did a slight reconfiguration with some amazing staff help from Andrew and Matthew, reconfiguring our cubicles so that smaller cubicle that they wanted to have for the tax board is now directly across from that office, which is where it actually didn't used to be. So we've done a little bit of internal adjustment. So we're kind of ready to roll. I don't know that we need a formal motion. I'm going to look more at Joanna there if that's formally required, but I wanted to, just for transparency reasons, I haven't had a chance to look at all the details in that language yet. It's too fresh. I don't have, feedback yet from my counterpart at the Board of Tax Practitioners, but I expect that that's what's in here is like 99.8% of what's coming out of here.
I mean, this is Joanna. Do you want board direction to continue on this process? It doesn't sound like you have anything finalized 100%
No,
yet.
but quite frankly, we're supposed to sign this by June 15th. So we are, some version of this document is supposed to get executed by June 15th.
Have they previously delegated authority to you to sign a document like this?
That's a really great question.
If not, that could be a motion, which is to delegate you the authority to finalize and sign the
Why don't we
document.
just, instead
Let's
of
just
me
make a
hunting
motion.
around in my delegated authority
just
right
do it.
now, why don't we just, if the board's comfortable, can we just do a motion to allow me to execute a sublease along these lines? Because I need to do something by June 15th.
I move to delegate authority to Martin to sign and execute the lease as discussed.
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes.
Make it
All
happen.
right, thank you.
9C, budget development. Really, most of this is going to have to wait until our July board meeting, because I don't even have the very basics of the initial budget document yet. Our June board meeting is just way too early. We have to submit our budget in by August 1. So I don't have actually much to report right now. Most of this is going to have to, quite frankly, come to the July board meeting. I don't have an answer, and I'm going to look at Reva here for a second. You may recall we made an ask around a deputy director position. That's still the only thing that I know for sure is that it's still in the classification and compensation evaluation process as to where that position is going to get placed. I don't believe we have a final.
Not
on
yet.
that
No, we don't have a
yet,
final answer. yet.
Right. And then just sequentially, what the board needs to know is that the moment we have a final answer as to where class and comp comes out on that position, it's only at that moment in time that I can start the work with DAS CFO on the fiscal side and the legislative fiscal office on gaining permission to fulfill the board's ask to get that position already in July 1, right? So there's a sequential piece. I have to have the HR done, and then I can make the ask on the fiscal side, right? So more on that in July, but that's kind of current state of where we are. So that gets us through 9C. 9D, I wanted to just, so this is the added agenda item around the exams. And essentially I got an email from Colleen Conrad, who's the Chief Operating Officer at NASBA. Early this morning, AICPA is gonna post the first, 2024 Q1 exam pass rates to their website sometime this afternoon, which probably means that they may already be out there because I don't know what time zone they're in. Essentially, pass rates are in the core sections, odd at 44.63, FAR 41.92, reg at 63.42, discipline exam sections, bar at 42.9, ISC at 50.9, and TCP at 82.3. What they also say is that candidate performance on the core exam sections generally aligns to historical passing rates of the pre-CPA evolution exam sections. ASCPA and the Board of Examiners have noted that TCP candidates were generally better prepared to take TCP than the bar candidates were in terms of taking bar, and ISC candidates were to take ISC. So acronym soup, but here we are. I don't know about you guys, but I somehow these rates don't seem as high as they were before.
It seems lower to me too, but I don't.
I mean,
So the fact that
I haven't had a
saying
chance
that
to
it's
analyze
similar,
this. I got
but-
this in at 7 a.m. this morning. But that was my gut reaction. It's
Yeah.
like, that seems kind of lower. So I was surprised to see that they are saying that this is kind of in line with historical averages, because that's not quite, or maybe I have an Oregon different vantage point, but
Thought it
this
was more in the
seems kind of low.
Yeah, I thought it was like low 60s or something.
Yeah.
but
I'm totally wrong. I don't, yeah.
So
Feels
anyway,
low- feels low
I
to
just
me.
wanted to take the advantage of, because I know there's a lot of people watching these scores, because this is the first time the new exam, is come out, right? So at least I wanted to report it out because it's literally hot off the press and of some interest in terms of how that new exam is performing. I'm unfortunately not prepared enough to kind of double check that messaging around this is in line with historical averages, but it just seemed a little low to be on the passage rate side. And I think I can go in as far as this in public session to say that I have had voices, especially out of academia, expressing worry to me about level of alignment between what is getting taught versus what is getting tested. And worries about, seeing dropping rates. So I'm gonna keep watching this a little bit around what that looks like going down the road. And maybe I'll find out when we get our Oregon specific score, maybe Oregon is doing better, because I think we have historically done a little bit better than the average in Oregon itself. That's the other piece I wanted to just throw out there. And then one final piece on the nomination side. I need to quickly get into my computer to get this right. The ask that I wanted to make from the board is, come on, let me get into my own computer here for a second. NASBA just sent out an email that actually all board members, with the exception of Megan, due to your recency, should have gotten around. They're opening up a new cycle of award nominations, and they have these 3 awards that they tend to do on the NASBA side for distinguished service. There's the William Van Renel, I can't even spell it, Rensselaer Public Service Award and the Lorraine P. Suck Standard of Excellence Award. I want to talk about the second one, the William Van Rensselaer Public Service Award, because it got my attention this time because I feel like Ray, who's been such a huge force in the accountancy profession as an educator, OSCPA, chair of this board, chair of our LRC, serving on the NASBA board, he's had a huge impact. And I wanted to gain permission on behalf of this board to see if we could nominate him. Ray just, quite frankly, ran for a NASBA vice chair position and did not get that nod, which would have prevented him from being nominated for this award, because you can't be on the board or been on the NASBA board in order to be eligible for this award. So since he actually didn't get nominated, it opens up an opportunity for us as a potential thank you and recognition of his service to nominate him. And if you're good with that, I will do the work behind the scenes. It's due on June 30th.
Yep. That's a, yeah, no brainer. So
awesome.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
That's, if we can, very quickly, I know we're already slightly past, I'll just do item 10, old business, real quick, because I think that's quick. Then we can kind of close out public session before we jump into executive session. But old business, I think it's just attendance at the NASBA Western Regional Conference, which is coming up June 23rd through 25th in Omaha. So yeah, I guess since we've last met, we authorized Jason to go. So Jason, thank you for making the time to attend. So you'll be there along with Martin. I think the other thing is that we nominated you for the Pacific Region alternate slot to serve on the NASBA nominating committee. So that's a big deal. So congrats on that. And yeah.
Did you get any feedback on that yet, Jason?
I've not heard anything about that, so.
Okay. Well, we know it's in the process and they were happy we nominated you, so.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah, they had interest in Jason specifically, so we were happy to nominate him and
Recruited.
Right, any questions on that? I hope you're gonna catch Beaver game on their way to a college World Series title. Just throwing that out there. All right.
But if there's a Duck game, you shouldn't go.
The Ducks might be there as well, and I
Ouch.
don't root against. All right. Let's see. So I think what we'll do is, yeah, we'll just go ahead and recess public session. And should we just pause now and then we'll grab lunch and come back before we convene?